What is up, folks? This is Corporal Hot Pockets with a new video in the long-awaited Orbital Drop podcast. Today we discuss the biggest and most momentous topic yet, an all-out brawl between Warhammer 40k's Imperium of Man and Star Wars' Galactic Empire. With me, I have Trooper Geo, Jiffed Up, Heister, and later guests who will be dissecting this scenario from every possible factor, such as troop strengths, weapons types, travel speeds, industrial capacity, harvesting ability, technological growth, and more. The whole 9 yards. But this topic is so grand that we will be splitting it into two parts. The first, today, the 30k Imperium, fresh off their successful conclusion of the Great Crusade and the victories against Chaos, see humans inhabit a nearby larger galaxy, no doubt descendants of split-away expeditions of the Dark Age of technology. They must be brought into the light of the Emperor and the Imperial truth, by force if necessary, and the Primarchs and Legione Astartes will make sure this happens, no matter how long it takes. Part 2 will be the Empire on the offensive, having successfully beaten the rebels in their own galaxy, now seek to bring this new strange one under the Dark Emperor's rule. Stay tuned for that. And also, do not worry, my UNSC ground combat grand overview is still in the works, with part 1 looking at the UNSC branches specifically and how they support each other, but it'll take some time. And lastly, like the genius that I am, I forgot to hit the record button until 10 minutes after the chat started, which is why I'm giving such a lengthy intro, but regardless, you'll figure it out. And also, I put some follow gameplay for you to look at, and some maps later on to show what I'm talking about when the specifics of the invasion start. So enjoy.
More precision guided, whereas with the Imperium, most of their ships carry weaponry that is able to fuck up an entire planet by just deploying it in a single area, because I feel as if the Imperium
even during the Clone Wars,
more...
they had bombs the size of small cars that could, I think, just shatter worlds. They were antimatter bombs. It was either shatter worlds
they use
or
them, though.
Yes, but tried. The CIS did.
CIS did, but that's not the Empire.
Mm-hmm. No, but it does go to show that they do have the tech.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but
they do have the tech, but does the Empire use that tech? That's the thing.
Yeah, is it mass produced? Is it there? And
have we seen it, honestly?
How are we, when we say destroy a planet, are we talking destroy crust? Are we talking this thing's now a rock or an asteroid to be mines now because life can't be sustained and atmosphere is gone? Because there are many different ways within the 40k universe that
I'm trying to remember how the bomb works, but the one I'm specifically thinking of, I believe, was the latter, where it either split the planet in half or rendered all life on it moot because it just did that much damage to the atmosphere.
Overall. Either way, the reason
so that would be equivalent to a cyclonic torpedo, and not a two-stage one, a single-stage one for 40k, which is a mass-produced thing that is ready for them. It's rare in the sense that there are so many ships, so not everyone gets one. They're usually reserved for at least cruiser class, but they exist pretty readily.
Either way, gents, the reason why I was saying this is because I was like, obviously both settings are capable of glassing and destroying worlds and rendering them lifeless. I was trying to look specifically at energy output from the ships to gauge their strengths, and so from what I gather, both ships are capable of doing a great deal of damage to worlds.
That's Rookie.
Hi, Rookie. Both settings are capable of dealing massive amounts of damage to worlds via their normal weapons. But which ones do you guys think come out on top? Or is it more so just relatively equal to the ships of equal size?
I think judging which one comes out on top, like in terms of which... Are you asking like which faction has the better glassing ability?
Or at the very least, which faction has more damage output per ship, essentially?
I would honestly say the Imperium, but it's all situational depending on how much damage you want to inflict.
Okay.
It is.
But
if
you're asking for like total destruction, it's the Imperium.
Okay. All right. And so next up, let's talk about size.
Hold on. First, I have to put out my incredibly controversial take real quick.
All right.
I think that the Star Wars ships are going to be very capable of punching above their suspected weight class, just because I am going with the old Star Wars Legends figure of 400 gigatons per shot.
I'm not going to take that into consideration, but I will tell you what I feel. So when it comes to Star Wars versus Imperium, the main things I look at is, obviously I was talking about energy output. Star Wars ships also seem a lot more efficiently run for their size. Imperium ships are very large, very ornate, very ceremonial in many ways. A great deal of their labor is very manual. Star Wars ships are also similar to that. They're nowhere near as undercrewed as Halo ships. Halo ships only have roughly 1,000 crewmen per cruiser and about maybe 4,000 to 5,000 per carrier or super carrier. Imperial ships are about, a Star Destroyer has 30,000 crew. Imperium ships are more than that, but not ludicrously more. Now,
You'd actually be surprised. So,
Well,
don't mean to cut you off again.
yeah.
The sword class frigate, that is the equivalent size firepower, or maybe not firepower. We can argue the difference between turbo lasers and macro cannons later.
Sure.
25,000 crew.
Right. And a lunar class is 100,000, correct?
I want to say that is dependent on whether or not it's a true lunar class or if it is a later repaired one.
All right. Either way, that's more than a Star Destroyer, which is, I believe it's equivalent in terms of...
Guys, I gotta go on mute for a minute.
All right. Either way, that seems about equivalent in terms of purpose or role within the fleet, but that's not like ludicrous. I mean, yeah, 100,000 was way more than 30,000, but it's not, it's not the same difference between Halo ships or Mass Effect ships or Star Trek ships.
We also got to remember that a lunar class is somewhere between 3 to, depending on which era of 40K, whether or not you're going with the ludicrous 80s lore or the slightly more realistic 90s to early 2000 lore, or the not very meticulous statisticians lore of the late 2010s and 2010s. Lunar classes, if I remember, are about 3 kilometers to 3.5. They're 3.5 to 4 kilometers in size.
Right.
Sorry, I focused a little more on the escort just because I was surprised at how close the escorts were to Star Destroyers.
Oh no, car bomb.
He is the Irish.
Well, I know they didn't fight a lot.
Okay, no, sorry. The lunar class is 5 kilometers.
Yeah, either way, it's much bigger than the ISD, but doesn't really have the commensurate crew size, and yet we also know that it's way less efficiently run in terms of crew distribution. A great deal of that crew is doing very menial tasks that in Star Wars, which by no means has advanced technology when it comes to automation, is still much more advanced than the Imperium. So that to me tells me that the Imperial crew on an ISD, even though it's not as big, it's more efficiently run, which indicates a higher overall productivity per ship, despite its much smaller package. I know we're getting a little bit into the weeds, but to me,
I know we're getting into the
matters
weeds.
A bit, and I feel like Yif would agree that the Star Wars ships are a lot more efficiently run, because you look at the Imperium ships, and you see that most of the crew are located in the lower levels, and the shit that they have to do to keep the ship running seems incredibly silly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I will give you when comparing to 40K. 30K, as we are now within the time of the Great Crusade, many of these ships are newer. Many of them still have automated tasks and situations.
That is true.
A lot of the lore that we see that is a little bit churched up
not
for
as bad
being
as 40K, but it's still yikes.
Yeah, but there are plenty of stories where Space Marines or others will go into Space Hulks that have ships from the 35th millennium, which is halfway through the Imperium's lifespan, and they are surprised at the automation of the hangars, of the simple auto loaders for the macro cannons, which require a lot less mechanical input, if any at all. There's a lot more trust in the machines and the machine spirits, and they realize that the Mechanicus probably had a lot more to do with the Navy in the early years of the Imperium.
Interesting. All right. And so then when it comes down to weapons and numbers, who do you want to give the overall advantage to in terms of just pure ship combat, ship to ship? Well, I know there's a lot more factors to look at, and we'll look at them. But so far, who do you guys want to put the overall in terms of which ships have the overall naval advantage?
I'm going to say it balances out in one regard versus another, because it's how do I put it other than a Star Wars ship can be outclassed in one way, that they outclass the Imperium ships, blah 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 blah. I think the biggest advantage the Imperium is going to have, especially at the start, is that their battle fleets are likely to be much larger than what the Empire is expecting to deal with.
I'm also willing to say that when it comes to taking damage and then dealing damage, while the damage they deal may be less precise, because they'll probably have a harder time hitting the Star Wars ships at first, at least with macro weapons and the kinetics. The lance beams will be much easier. I would say power output and input is going to be in Imperium's favor. Star Wars is definitely going to have speed. Speed will be their thing.
Yes. Now,
but a lot of the other things about their fleets are going to be an issue. Like Star Wars is not going to be able to use interdictors on.
I think interdictors might work a little bit because I remember, doesn't planetary mass affect how warp travel works, specifically informing the opening? Was it not gates?
Mostly in their Mandeville points.
yes.
Yeah.
Which Mandeville points are still a thing in 40K, but it's the same thing for the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
if
also-
I recall, if a ship tries to do it too close to like a planet caught in the gravity well or something, it could potentially explode.
Okay. So then if that's
It's more like it does more damage to the planet itself and has a possibility of causing a warp effect on the planet.
So wait, this is meant
It's
to,
more damage to the planet than it is the ships.
so it's not so much for ships.
It would destroy the ship, though, I believe. I remember that being a thing in one of the recent Indominus novels. I'm trying to think of the name, but a Space Marine battlecruiser was trying to flee from a Necron attack group, but they couldn't jump out of the way because they were still caught within the gravity well of some of the planets in the system.
Well,
It was too dangerous.
could that then I'm not sure, and I won't put it as decisive for one side or another. Next up, to compare numbers, let's start from the top. So with the Empire, they have the Death Star. They probably have a couple other large stations, including some massive planetary shipyards, probably on scale with Forge Worlds in terms of productive capacity. They have roughly, I think, 12 or 13 executor class super Star Destroyers, the biggest. I don't know if the Eclipse is a thing yet. Maybe that comes later. Probably close to 100 Star Dreadnoughts of all types. The Assertors, the Bellators, and I think there were a couple other major classes. And these are ships that are 7 to 15 kilometers long, so they are colossal. And then after that, they probably have around couple of thousand battle cruisers, which are 2 to 5 kilometers long. And then after that, they have about 25,000. Was it just 25,000 Imperial Star Destroyers or 25,000 Star Destroyers of all classes?
I want to say
No, it was ISD Mark IIs, I think it was.
All right, so
I
25.
think it was specifically Mark IIs.
Mark II.
I think it was all ISDs, but I will double check that.
All right. So they have several other classes of Star Destroyers. I don't know if there's any Venators left, but they have Secutors, they have Tectors, they have Victories.
They were trying to destroy the Venators. And,
they were,
yes. Build more other ships.
And then after that, you go hundreds of thousands of escorts. It's overall the Empire has a very large fleet, which I suspect might rival the Great Crusade Imperium in terms of raw size. And here's the thing. And this I feel needs to be emphasized. We were talking a lot about it, but I feel like we have to emphasize it right here, right now, because it's not spoken a lot about. The Empire has an absolutely off-the-charts industrial capability. The boys at Generation Tech did a good job discussing this. Essentially, what the Empire did once they took over is that they nationalized a great deal of industries. They obviously, Sheev Palpatine took over the banks.
Creamy Sheev.
Yep, exactly. They took over the banks. They had a lot of inflation. They also had a lot of government contracts and projects, and by getting rid of the clone army and instead replacing it with volunteers and draftees, they had a lot of people working in the military and in the military adjacent industries, military industrial complex. In the long term, this took a great deal of capital and labor out of the market, which essentially doomed everyone's economic futures in Star Wars. In the short term, though, it gave them unprecedented increases in military capacity and industrial production, which is how in 20 years they built up such a colossal war machine. Everything we see from the Empire in the original Star Wars movies, the side books, legends, and canon, and the aftermath stuff, all of that was built up over just 20 years, even though it continued to be a menace against, the Empire's enemies for over a century. I believe it was Thrawn's Empire of the Hand or whatever, or the Empire successors. Those continued to be a problem for 130 years after, and most of that, the core of that.
I think it's actually up to 160 years.
160.
Because there was a guy that made the solar system killing ships.
Yep. And the core of that was still stormtroopers, TIE fighters, and Imperial Star Destroyers. So the core of every single Empire successor state, as well as a great deal of other galactic successor states, was Imperial hardware made in that period. So what I'm trying to emphasize is the Imperium has a ludicrous industrial capacity and a ludicrous manufacturing might, but I don't think they're the same. The Emperor, of course, he took over Terra and he took over Mars, and he with that he was able to get Mars's massive mechanical proficiency, as well as all the other forge worlds that they united with. But that still took them 200 years. They built a crazy amount of good stuff, but the best stuff was still things that they discovered or repaired, like the phalanx. They did not, yeah?
Not necessarily 200 years to get Mars.
No, 200.
That happened within the first 5.
Yeah,
200
right.
years is the length of the Great Crusade.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Is taken up in travel time.
Yeah, that's what I meant. It was 200 years to essentially build up the entire force we see by the end. I'm sure they built the Glorianas and all the other big projects a lot faster, but I'm saying everything we see by the time of the Horus Heresy took 200 years to build up, whereas everything we see in Star Wars took 20 years to build up. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm just saying that the timelines are a little bit different. And with that,
there's also the fact that there
is
is a standardization within the Star Wars ships, which can help and hurt depending on how things go along, especially in long-term combat. There's the fact that while the TIE fighters are wonderfully easy to produce, they might have an advantage depending on speed, they have no protection whatsoever.
Right.
Nope. They also have no life support.
Right.
They have no life support, which I will get to that when we get to Navy, because I can go into how the Furies themselves are going to give, but we're going to go to that.
Now, the Empire did have... Yeah, go ahead.
Before we jump to another point, I also want to say I 100% think that the Empire has a much substantially larger scaling manufacturing ability, given the galaxy that they possess is about 2.5 times the size of the Milky Way.
It's not
that the Imperium has.
I don't think it's too.
It is bigger.
It's 20%.
When double checking that, it's about 20%.
Right.
20%.
The Milky Way is 100%
larger.
Where does that come from?
I believe the galaxy was described as being 120,000 light years, whereas the Milky Way, which we presume
then it's more dense. Like there are 2.5 times more planets.
It might be more dense, and part of the reason why is because civilization was evolving much longer in Star Wars, and that's another point. Is in Star Wars, the first galactic governments sprouted 20,000 years ago, whereas in the Imperium's case, obviously there were other major alien factions throughout the galaxy for much longer, but for the Imperium, as far as I know, for humanity, they only started colonizing planets, I think, was it in the... When did they first start? So I think it was in the solar system was for 5,000 years, and then after that... And then after that they spent...
The golden age of humanity is, if I remember correctly, is estimated to be around 15,000. Year 15,000.
15 to 25, right?
About 25, and then from there we go into the dark age of technology, and then things start to go down. During that time period, the Eldar Empire is a thing, and it controls a majority of the empire of there. In fact, it's the fall of the Eldar Empire and them ing Slanesh into existence.
Thank you for self-censoring. I'm not going to have to censor that in the post-production. Thank you.
Yeah, just put R2 scream there.
Yeah.
But basically, Slanesh's birth that actually may have been what caused the Dark Age of technology, specifically the humans' reliance on AI and a lot of higher technology, and then warp influence on said AI.
Right, and so then Old Knight starts at around M25. It's about 5,000 years of bad, and then Big E rises in late M29, early M30, and that's when he starts the Primarch project, Space Marine project. He starts making Thunder Warriors and Custodes, and all that good stuff. So either way, what I'm saying with that is by M30, by the time that the Great Crusade is climaxing, it was about 15,000 years from when humanity specifically started going out into the stars. 15,000 years compared to Star Wars, where the first galactic government started forming, was about 5,000 years longer. And so we can guess that interstellar stuff was probably thousands of years before that. So Star Wars has had a bit, not a whole lot. 5,000 years, 15,000 compared to 20,000 is not orders of magnitude more time, but it is substantially more time for Star Wars to build up their infrastructure, colonize more planets, settle them, and whatnot. And it's
I would also argue that Star Wars has, in many ways, also lost a good portion of its technology and regressed in its own universe, especially after the time of the I just had it in my head. The Rusan Reformation, particularly hampering its own shipbuilding and weapons capabilities for the longest time. And then the years right before the Rusan Reformation, where the entire Galactic Republic, according to legends, decided to eschew their blasters, and suddenly melee combat was a thing under the Jedi for the longest time. Because...
True, but there were still...
reasons?
There were still...
Sorry, there are progressions. There is technological progression in Star Wars, but it's in like the micro scale, in the sense of like a turbo laser from the Old Republic is nowhere near as capable as one from the modern Empire.
Right.
But
and the
like
ships,
you can't really see that.
Right, and ships got a lot bigger as well. It was, I forgot what it was called, the Sith battlecruiser from the Old Republic. That was about 800 meters long, whereas the ISD is about 1,600 meters long.
But we also know in more than a few occasions where that cruiser is actually just about as technologically advanced as the Star Destroyer it was, that it later replaced it thousands of years later. They're rediscovering a lot of the large technology and weapon technology. And for example, and this was one of the things I was able to look up, Heister, you're definitely willing to debate this one for Legends, but a majority both in canon and Legends, the turbo laser's maximum range is around 1,500 kilometers.
Okay. That sounds relatively right from what I'm thinking. But
that's knife fighting range in 40K.
I would absolutely debate that using more of the Legends novels.
Yeah. Well, Legends is all sorts of craziness. Overall, I would say that's the thing. Range is always a tricky one because everyone's going to say weird things and everyone's going to show way shorter ranges because cinematics.
Agreed. Especially when it comes to tabletops.
Cinematics.
Right. I'm gonna go down to logic, and so overall, turbo lasers are unguided, as far as I know, unguided line of shot projectiles. Although they can be spammed in large volumes like a machine gun. So my only argument with that is turbo lasers and many of the other lasers within Star Wars are actually not lasers, they're not.
But rather plasma weapons.
Oh, no, yeah, they're definitely plasma weapons for sure. They just call them
so there's definitely a time period in which they're going to dissipate because they lose the energy to stay that hot.
So Star Wars physics is weird.
It is weird, yes.
With how the speed of light is supposed to work. Because there are many times when we see... not necessarily see, but when a character shoots or ship shoots, and then all of a sudden the target is just hit from thousands and thousands of kilometers away instantly. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why.
Whereas, when I'm going to go look to 40K weaponry, lance batteries do not have an extended range. Because they are true lasers, they are affected by nebula's diffusion. So there is going to be a maximum range, but it's going to be different from each place it's shot from.
Sure.
Whereas macro batteries, nova cannons, and many of the other energy-assisted kinetic weapons that the Imperium has are usually around 10,000 kilometers, because at that point, I think due to safety or whatever, the warheads will usually explode.
That makes sense. I think part of it is because, just like with Max, it's hard to hit targets past a certain distance because longer distance means longer travel time, which... Here's the thing about space combat. Technically speaking, engagement distance is relative to the speed of the enemy ship and your weaponry.
Yes.
I mean, speed is pretty relative, but I feel like distance from you to the other guy is pretty solid. Unless, obviously it's going to be constantly changing.
I mean, yes, but here's the thing. If you're engaging a target that is completely stationary, you can fire at it from any distance, and the effective range doesn't change.
That's very true.
If it's something like an Eldar ship, then the effective range of your weapons suddenly drops substantially because they can, be not hit.
Right, whereas hitting planets is, not that hard because they're so big and their paths are so predictable.
Well, that's a silly math.
Yeah, exactly. Which, some poor servitor or whatever, cogitators, is that what they're called? What are the main...
Cogitators are parts.
Yeah, cogitators are basically computers.
Yeah, except they use like human brains, right?
Yeah,
Well, the
servitors are.
servitors and certain cogitators will tend to use human cerebral cortex and the brain. However,
But where?
there are still a lot of mechanical parts within a cogitator, and if it fails, it's going to be like a 1950s, 1960s computer. It will still work. In fact, a computer that you and I have now would be considered a cogitator within 40K. It could work. They just don't have all the technology to make it as thin or as small as they do, because we're not relying on AI. We don't have chat it's basically 40K has the computers, if not slightly better than what we have now. They just don't have chat GPT.
Speaking of, this episode is sponsored by Opera, where you can have ChatGPT built into your browser. I'm kidding. We're not
By my ass.
Oh my god, the government is spying on me more? What?
What? They weren't already?
I'm kidding. We're not sponsored by Opera. Please don't sue me for saying that. But Opera is pretty cool, and it does have ChatGPT built into it. So please give me money. Overall, so yeah, the ships are pretty cool. Now, the big one though, the thing that we've kind of been avoiding, Space Marines.
We haven't been avoiding that at all.
Yeah, the one thing that.
Well, before we continue this, I need to get more belligerent. I'll be right back.
Sure. Yeah, the one thing that Warhammer sadly does not cover enough. I just wish that they covered more Space Marines. They talk too much about the aliens and their stuff. I just wish they would, can all the Xenos books and they just talk more about Space Marines, because
Is that a genuine opinion? No. Repeat your opinion. It better have been an opinion.
Either way, I've said my part. So, Space Marines, how does y'all think that all of the Space Marines... Actually, no. First up, we're going to have to toss out some numbers. So, based off of my estimation, I went through this Legion by Legion with Jiffy. And I think I'll probably just, rather than listing all of them out, I'll put them on screen. But overall, we estimated the Space Marine Legions to be... the Ultramarines were the biggest known legion at around 250,000. Alpha Legion could be all over the place. Dark Angels, Luna Wolves are probably around 200,000. Iron Warriors are probably around 170,000. Imperial Fists.
Actually, we can fairly. I'd have to find it because there were numbers given. Pretty much all but two of the legions were in less than 200,000 during the heresy.
That doesn't sound right.
So this is around the time of pre-heresy, and we also know that the legions themselves did not
before invading Galaxy. So
the legions. Yeah, but the legions themselves did not include the neophytes in those numbers.
Right.
Or the scout marines as they later become in the 40K.
Yeah.
I'm not including those either.
But Heister, 200,000 for most of the legions does not sound right. Most of the numbers I've seen, the Ultramarines were considered the biggest at 250,000.
No.
And that was
what I said was most of the legions, except for two of them, had less than
100,000. Yeah. No, that sounds right. I've heard the number 150,000, and from what I gather, most legions were a bit more than that. A couple of the really unstable ones were smaller. I've heard a number, I don't know where, I think it was from Major Kill or Luton, that said that the Raven Guard was around 80,000 at the time of Eastvan 5. Part of the reason for their smaller legion is... I don't think their gene seed is particularly unstable, but what happened was...
during this time period is entirely because, and this is actually a known issue before the heresy, that actually was the reason why Corvus may or may not have turned traitor, and by that I mean not. Corvus was his troops before he took over them and slightly after were basically being used as cannon fodder by Horus.
Right.
The Raven Guard was pretty much the distraction for the tip of the spear. And
he banished a great deal of his Terran-born Ravens because he couldn't work with them. He couldn't retrain them the way Sanguinius did and a whole bunch of the other folks. And so that left his legion relatively under strength. The Salamanders were also
the Emperor's Children, who were slightly under strength, despite no matter how much they built up. And they did build up pretty damn quickly. But there were... At one point, they were down to only a couple thousand Marines.
I believe they didn't they get the name Thousand Sons because there were only 1,000 of them when they were found by Magnus, or when Magnus was found?
No. I'm talking the Emperor's Children.
The Emperor's Children did some risky shit.
Emperor's Children was
it saving the Emperor? I forget what it was.
It was.
They did something, and the Emperor gifted them with that name, and I think not.
I believe. I think I know what you're talking about. I was thinking the Thousand Sons where you were talking about that. Yes, I believe it was around 400 when they found. By the time, because of the blight, when they found. frick his face, the God's
Ferris.
perfect. Yeah,
No, not Ferris. Wow. Yeah,
Fulgrim.
Ferris's butt buddy.
Fulgrim. Yeah. God's perfect femboy. Yeah. And so, however, Major Kill has said that the Emperor's children had a relatively stable gene seed. So after they found him, they were actually able to build up their numbers relatively well by the start of the heresy. But you're right, they did have that small bottleneck, which I think would definitely affect their size. That's the thing is, the reason why the Ultramarines had so much more than everyone else is because everything went right for them. They had a very stable gene seed, very low casualties, found their Primarch relatively early on, optimized the crap out of the process of making Astartes. They had a massive population to draw from, and the
only group that probably improvised better was Perturabo's Iron Warriors.
Right.
The problem is
Guys,
they
I'm
were
back.
sent.
Sorry about that. What did I miss?
All right, Gio, we talked about ships, and now we are talking about Space Marines, the one thing that Warhammer doesn't quite cover as much as it should. They talk too much about Xenos.
I hate you.
But we're talking about Space Marines, and specifically right now we're trying to gauge numbers, and after that we're going to try to talk about how they would fare against the Empire and what can the Empire do to adapt. But right now we're talking about numbers, and
May I interject here slightly, just with the, are we talking about ground combat?
not
yet.
Strictly
not
combat.
right, not yet. Right.
I believe so. Pulling up numbers, I was able to, during the height of the Crusade, there was about 2.2 million Space Marines combined.
That sounds about right. Yeah. As far as we know, Alpha Legion could be
Kind of low, isn't it?
No, that sounds about. I mean, Ultramarines about 250,000, Dark Angels about 200,000, Luna Wolves around there. That sounds about right.
We're also not including the number of neophytes that each of them had, the fact that they did take a number of casualties, and despite the fact that everyone loves to put up their numbers as being huge, it takes a lot to make a Space Marine.
It does.
A single company. A single company of Space Marines, 100 Space Marines can, at least 40k standards, companies are much larger during the Crusades, are capable of taking a planet all on their own, and everyone loves to overstate the fact, or understate just how much the Imperial Army did during the Crusades.
Yes. Now,
They were the hammer.
One thing I'll point out, the fighting tactics between 30 and 40k when it comes to Space Marines, from what I've seen, are very different. In 40k,
it is substantially different.
Right. The 40k Marines are small elite strike forces deployed company at a time or less. It's a very big deal for multiple companies or even the whole chapter to show up. I believe
the best way I can describe it is in 40k, you are the Space Marines are Delta Force or Navy SEALs, according to modern day US. For our Canadian friends, I don't remember the name of that special forces group, though sorry?
They don't matter.
They don't. Dude, Canada doesn't even have a Marine Corps. They should not exist. All right, if you don't.
Okay, we're gonna
Canadian slander.
Bias. I have Canadian friends, and I respect them, especially in the service.
I have gay friends too.
Plus, I've been drank under the table by the Belgians, and the Aussies tried, but unfortunately, I never got a chance to meet up with them at the bar.
All right. But yeah.
That aside, to best explain it is, as I said, 40k are your Delta Force operators, your Navy SEALs. They are your Tier 1 special operators. During the Crusades, the Marines start off as their namesake, like the U.S. Marine Corps. They are shock infantry, shock forces that go in, deal with the crap, kill as many as necessary. They are not a precision tool. But they are not a hammer. They are basically like taking.
They're an axe.
An axe or a spear. Not a spear tip, a spear.
Okay, that sounds
By the end of the Crusades, or during the middle of the Crusades, many of them have found their specialization. They are more akin to, say, Tier 2 or Tier 1 U.S. Army Rangers, Marine MARSOC, and some Air Force Special Forces, because apparently Air Force has Special Forces. Just kidding, I love you, brothers. But they are...
Air Force! Sorry.
Yeah, but I see. Yeah,
it's okay, Carbomb, or Geo. I have a sin that I must confess to you later.
Oh God, you're part of the Air Force, aren't you?
No. I'm an Irish American who I know that doesn't mean shit to you, and if anything, you can shit on my heritage later. But I have committed the greatest of sin in the fact that I own a Guinness glass and is currently filled with a decidedly un-Guinness-like product. While we are discussing this. Listen, it seems like it was a great...
I bought the bullet, and I plan to use the whole bullet.
Yes, well, it seemed like it was a lesser of the two sins instead of putting an un-Guinness-like product in a gigantic mug stein with the Scottish flower.
Either way,
I'm gonna kill
gents.
myself 1 second.
Either way, gents.
Okay, we've gone off on too many tangents.
We have. Either way, but yes, Space Marines are used very differently. They're a lot more blunt. Although, again, still an elite force. One thing that best exemplifies this, and I know this is not all legions, but the Iron Warriors, on numerous occasions, they suffered tens of thousands of dead per planet. These numbers are unimaginable in 40K. To lose...
They were kind of also unimaginable in 30K.
They were, yeah, they were. That's true.
Had a horrible attrition.
They were.
And they knew it.
But there's actually a reason for this within the Iron Warriors.
Because
Oh yeah, there was
this
a
is-
reason.
Right.
It was kind of silly, but there was a reason.
They would intentionally
Are we
send their
talking about the
neo.
Iron Cage?
No, this is pre-heresy. They would send their neophyte. They would send their neophytes in on the first waves, intentionally using the boarding shields, mostly as their shock infantry, and allow the veterans to do the actual fighting. And if you survived long enough as a neophyte with the assault marines, you would then become more respected and start to specialize.
Wow, that sounds just like the Black Templars. It's amazing the amount of habits they picked up from traitors.
I like the Black Templars. Shut the fuck up.
The Black Templars also use their neophytes more like squires. They accompany a veteran in there to and learn from them. There's no veterans when it comes to the neophytes for the Iron Warriors. It's just, oh, you have a slightly good head on your shoulders. Guess what? You're the corporal who's going to lead this group of can't curse. Whelps. You live, and guess what? You become a pseudo-veteran in the fact that we might somewhat respect the fact that you can live through
Right.
You're having
combat.
spoken promotion.
Exactly. No, yeah, 100%. But like even for the Ultramarines,
The other thing is their key stubbornness, specifically
Yes.
with not the Iron Hands, the Proto-Rebels boys. What were they called again?
Iron Warriors.
Iron Warriors, Iron Within, Iron Without.
Yes.
Yeah, they're remarkably stubborn.
Yes.
They'll just bash their head against a brick wall, regardless of how bad their concussion
The
is.
iron
getting.
doesn't bend. The iron either stays strong or shatters. The other legions who
Iron
change
actually does bend. It bends slightly. It's
does.
slightly malleable
But
metal.
they don't- but
they
they
never
don't
pick
bend.
that up.
Exactly. And for them, changing tactics is a sign of weakness. You're not strong enough to endure to win using your normal tactics. You're bending based off the enemy. The enemy should be bending based off of you. So for them, it's a badge of honor that they can withstand such casualties and not break. That they can endure such damage, even though it's deeply wrong.
Wasn't it the HRUD that annihilated a lot of them?
Yes.
Back
Yes.
in the
Warsmith
Yes,
D'Antioch.
they were sent against the Harad, which would rapidly age a lot of them.
Warsmith
And that
D'Antioch.
they were thrown up against some of the worst Xenos. The only other legions that were thrown up against Xenos of probably equal horribleness were the Dark Angels.
Yes. Yes, dude,
and-
No, well, they had a choice.
The Dark Angels took 50,000 dead when fighting the Rangdang. So yeah, they got hammered too. Meanwhile, the Ultramarines.
And then
The
the
worst-
Blood Angels took quite a bit. They weren't as bad during the Crusades, but during the Heresy, the Blood Angels
yeah.
were the first to run up against Chaos.
Right, but
Chaos forces.
interesting. Just to show you how well the Blueberries had it, the worst
And
battle.
we kicked ass, mind you.
You got slaughtered at first.
Cygnus was bad, but either way, just to show you how well the Blueberries had it, their worst Great Crusade battle was just 6,000 casualties. Are you kidding me? Just 6,000.
Well, the Blueberries are also much more. And listen, you're never gonna find I wouldn't say a greater Ultramarine hater than me.
I don't-
But as someone who got into 40K through Rin's World, through
Yes.
my first, and then later through guard books and other stuff, and during the height of the Matt Ward era, and just. Well, I shouldn't say the height of it, but around that time period. I'm not going to have a lot of respect for the Ultramarines as much as I am slowly gaining some. But the Ultramarines, aside from their stupid color scheme, are willing to bend and move and change tactics. They are
Yes.
actually very versatile.
Yes. All right. Either way, we've spoken enough about the Marines. We got a rough number. So we have a rough starting amount of, say, around 2.2 million. Let's say they build up to 2.5 million by the time the invasion of the Star Wars galaxy gets going. How quickly can they gain numbers is the question. How do the
What do you mean
legions,
gain numbers? Like, new members, or?
as they're actively fighting, how quickly can they both replace their losses and grow? Because all the legions grew over the course of the Crusade, despite taking casualties, as they took more land and as they got more and
During
more.
the Crusade, they were constantly recruiting as
Right.
they were crusading.
Exactly.
You know, the legions never stopped
Right.
recruiting.
Right.
So I mean,
So that's the thing. If they
it
start,
depends on how. It depends how often they take losses as well, because there could be some engagements where, in fact, if you don't mind my interjection here, you guys can stop me if you disagree.
sure.
But in my mind, how I see ground combat happening is very rarely will there be ground combat where Space Marines will deem it as worthy enough for Marines to be deployed, because I feel as if the Imperial Army on their own could very much have a good chance at contending with the Imperial Army. I don't really feel as if there's a lot of situations that would be dire enough for Marines to be deployed, but that's just me.
Okay.
So Carbomb brought up two subjects actually that I was going to later. One, the fact that we just said Imperial Army twice, and we meant both Star Wars and the Imperial.
I know what he meant. We knew what he meant.
Let's say
And-
Imperium Army, and Imperial Army, Imperium Navy and Imperial Navy.
Sorry. The Solar Auxilia, right? Aren't those the predecessors to the Guard?
Yes.
No, because, well, yes and no. The Solo Auxilia are actually only a few regiments, and many of them, while they did follow certain Primarchs, they are specific to Sol system, and they
Isn't it just
are
called the
venerable
Imperial Army
regiments.
at the time?
Sorry, what?
During the Great Crusade, wasn't it just called the Imperial Army?
Yes, that's why
But
I
that
was
was-
making
Yeah,
that
there was
comment.
like no other distinction.
Right.
Well, that's the other thing. The Imperial Army also included the Navy.
And
Yeah,
the
that's why I said there was no other distinction. It was
Right.
all bunched up and not cauterized.
right, the Army, the
Combined.
Space Marines.
Yeah. It was a combined arms group, which it is not in 40k, for
Right.
better and for worse.
Right.
But the other thing is that
combined arms was the Astartes, because they were known as Imperial Marines, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh? Can you repeat that?
I think so,
Weren't
but
the Astartes during the Great Crusade known as like Astartes in the Great Crusade era? They were known as Imperial Marines. They didn't fall under the Imperial Army
No,
category.
they didn't.
They never did.
Wait, did they still have their own ships independent of the Imperial Army, or did it all just fall under
Yes,
the
they were
private-
always an independent-ish faction, and that ish is very important.
Or is it
ish in the fact that there were Imperial Army, quote unquote Army, naval personnel running those ships alongside the Marines, but these ships basically knew we take command from the Marine and not from the Admiral around us, unless
Okay.
the Admiral is in agreement with the Marine commander,
so?
who 9 times out of 10 was either a high captain or the Primarch himself.
Right.
Space
You want to
Marines
argue with the
also-
Primarch?
Right.
Yeah, they also generally refused to move slow enough so that the Imperial Army could follow behind them.
Mhm.
They were kind of rushing ahead.
Because those were
Once
the
again,
order-
depending on the legion. The other thing is that the Imperium Army would very much be able to counter a good portion of what the Empire could throw at them ground force wise. They were a very flexible force, and while they were not 100% standardized during this time period, a lot of them were coming from advanced worlds, and there was still a lot of pride in joining the Imperial Army. There was conscription, but it was kind of like the same way that America conscripted in World War II. You could be a drafted soldier or a volunteer soldier, and 9 times out of 10, you got drafted as you were probably coming in to volunteer.
Right.
The drafting only started to become a bad thing towards the end of that war, and either way, it was still kind of seen as prestigious, or at the very least, a good thing to help the Imperium expand.
Sure.
The Imperium's army could very much counter and very much be equal to, if not greater than, the Empire's army and the Stormtrooper Corps, just because many of them are baseline humans. Nobody's
The
really advanced.
Stormtroopers are not the Imperial Army.
Right.
I know that, but they suffer this. But they suffer the same thing that we have today, with the differences between I'm using the United States only just because they are a very common thing for everyone. The Marine Corps does not always, aside from the early times of
Oh, keep going.
We get it. You're a red-blooded American.
My blood is red, white, and blue.
Ew, France.
Don't utter such
The
heresy.
Stormtrooper Corps, like the
Dude,
Marine
you
Corps, is not very reliant on armor. It has very much quick QRF force. It
Right.
is light in its ability, in its movements to
highly
stay
mobile
quick.
as well.
Yeah, they're meant to stay highly mobile, kind of like how the Space Marines are, except the Space Marines are so strong that they just bring their armor with them on top of their backs.
And
I mean,
later go burn.
In terms of the purposes they're meant to fulfill, yeah, they are similar because stormtroopers are shock troopers.
There's also the fact that the few times we see in the Star Wars movies AT-ATs, AT-STs, they are actually on loan from the Imperial Army to the Stormtrooper Corps.
Basically, yeah.
So, you know,
That's why they're known as like joint operations.
Yes.
Kind of, yeah.
And there are different levels to the Imperial Army, like you mentioned with the Solar Auxilia. Those guys are basically the equivalent of, I don't want to say the Stormtroopers, but there's a difference between the Imperial Army trooper who is using what would later become known as flak armor, trying to out the new Imperial, starting to become official issue Mars pattern las gun, versus the Solar Auxilia in full ceramite armor that looks like a diver suit, but is more protected than, you know, the guys in 40K who are using ceramite, and has a Volkite weapon. Basically, the equivalent of an Volkite weapon. Basically, the equivalent of a long-range anti-tank weapon, as an anti-infantry rifle.
It's really like it's good against lightly armored targets. It's shit against tanks.
Okay.
I would argue against that because the Volkite was the only reason that Solar Auxilia were able to stand up against the Marines.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good against Marines because it cooks them in their armor.
That's okay. That's
that
something
is
I want
one
to
of
talk
the big
about.
things about it.
Gents, that's something I want to talk about. Is from what I gather, though, from my limited knowledge of 40K lore, what later became the Guard really was relatively underdeveloped during the Crusade because the focus was on the Marines as the front line. Since the Marines lost a great deal of their number and prestige, they needed to withdraw as that elite strike force, whereas the Guard needed to stand up as the primary ground defense. And because that
they did, but they were still very much the hammer of the Imperium because they were the ones who are left behind too. So we're not gonna. Basically, the difference was now they were the focus of the standardization. Mm-hmm. They still had a lot of forces, but it was kind of like, how can I say?
Well, the thing is,
before it was like you're using the weapons from your home world, unless the Imperium deems them to be subpar, in which case then we're going to bring you up to our standard. If you have a higher standard issue weapon and armor, guess what? You can kind of continue to use that, and the Imperium's going to figure out a way to manufacture to keep you standardized. When it became the Guard, standardizing became a thing for them, and they had to start using all the same stuff so that the newly minted Unitorum could keep everyone supplied.
Okay. So then if you guys believe that the Imperium has the decisive ground-based advantage, what do you think Star Wars, what do you think the Empire can do to counter this? They have a great deal of manpower and they have a massive industrial capacity and they react very quickly. Do you believe they have the capacity of creating more powerful vehicles, creating better armor, maybe
yes, maybe easily
powered armor to some extent? Some sort of super soldier cyborgs, that type of
stuff. So here's the thing, because the Death Star didn't explode, I'm going to take this to a sort of, I wouldn't say extreme, but like the next logical step. 2 years, it was already being done during that, but because, it didn't blow up, the funds can be redistributed back towards other Imperial products that were still ongoing, but also very promising.
Right.
One of the big ones I think we're definitely going to see are Dark Troopers.
Yes, and those were aging clone troopers who were augmented with cybernetics. Is that correct?
Yeah, but they were highly unstable mentally and had really high suicide rates.
Okay.
That was the first. There are multiple generations. Chances are we'll be seeing, Mark IIs and Mark IIIs. Mm-hmm. And that will absolutely be something that Space Marines will need to come in and deal with, because those things are fucking horrifying.
Maybe within the Space Marines, but the droids within the Star Wars universe are extremely susceptible to EMPs. And I know I made the argument in the past that nuclear or atomic fire comes with the EMP blast, but I do believe that the Imperium has EMP weapons that can be used. Find the fact that if we are still in the 30K universe for innovation, it's not going to be that hard to find surplus droid popper grenades from the Clone Wars and figure those out.
Okay.
For some, yes, but like there are droids that are hard to like. There's a lot of ifs ands about it.
Right.
Dark
It's not
Troopers,
again.
I think, are going to be a very big thing, considering they can survive reactor explosions.
Right.
I get that, but I think the other thing is a lot of Star Wars is very much plasma and energy based, and not a lot of it is hardened against slug throwers, as you called them, kinetic weapons. And the Imperium has a lot.
Like the Empire, the Engineer Corps, their Engineer Corps used their own version of bolters.
Really? Self-propelled,
Yes.
self-propelled kinetic projectiles?
The grenades is like
I guess
sort of like
okay,
a gyro
so
jet, but it was a bolter.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. There is a difference of power there, but yes.
All right.
The other thing is the Imperium army, still within maybe like a platoon level, there's going to be a melt-a-gun. And I'm sorry, that thing's anti-tank.
Okay.
I do not think it's going to hurt a Dark Trooper.
I think it would cut straight through a Dark Trooper, considering how powerful a melt-a-gun can be in terms of cooking like Men of Iron. Like we've seen melt-a-guns absolutely tear through men of Iron, and if we're comparing a Dark Trooper to a Man of Iron,
No.
they're kind of similar.
Aren't Men of Iron way more powerful?
Men of Iron are very, very.
Men of Iron give Space Marines a run for their money.
Right, like I heard that the Dark Angels dropped off 12 Men of Iron, enslaved Men of Iron on one planet with the Line, and like hours later the Line was the last living thing left on that planet. Is it that bad?
I don't remember that, but I didn't read that book.
I don't know about that one. It also depends on the level of Men of Iron, because the Men of Iron are very vague.
They're an AI, right? So they can inhabit all sorts of different bodies.
Yes, but it's also hinted at that they prefer to stay within certain combat platforms.
Okay.
Like there's a preference to seeing like this is my body almost.
I see. Either way, but back to what we were saying, and I wanted to touch on this I wanted to expand on this because you guys touched on it. How effective do you guys think blasters are compared to 40k infantry weapons? Las guns, flak armor, Ceramite. Bolters are pretty powerful, and I have no doubt that a bolter will turn a...
Very effective, both because they impart thermal and kinetic energy.
I'm not going to disagree completely with that, but I am going to say that as much as in sometimes Star Wars Legends we see blaster bolts breaking open concrete and doing some damage, that's partially, I think, because of it being heat-based and able to, explode basically immediately vaporize the moisture, which is something that both las weapons are capable of doing. And we're also talking the stronger las weapons of 30k. But so when it comes to the flak armor, when it comes to that, I think Ceramite has a chance. I don't know about flak armor, but once again, numbers are a thing.
Yes.
And the fact that when it comes to blasters, they are significantly slower.
Okay.
They are able to be dodged by the human reaction.
Yes. So Astartes would actually probably find.
I would say the average human has a chance.
That's another one of those weird Star Wars things where it's in the books it's described very differently, and we also see they're also portrayed differently in all of the media. Generally speaking, there was an instance where one was used to shoot someone from, I think it was about 5 kilometers. He was on a mountain. He was shooting someone at a house from the mountaintop, and he shot. The bolt hit the person in the house in less than a second. It crossed that distance without issue. I'm like, okay, cool.
To me, Star Wars: The Clone Wars is the gold standard, and I go based off of that. And in that, they're fast, but they're also, you can see them coming. You can probably even dodge if you're in Astartes for sure. Does that mean that they can that they're capped at that? I don't think so. I think that they can be improved. And that's the thing is, from what I gather, the Empire isn't really very prepared to counter the Imperium very well, but the Empire moves very quickly. So I believe that they can improvise and adapt very quickly. And so what I was about to say is, we see blasters hit humans, clone troopers, stormtroopers, and obviously they do some damage. But from what I gather, you don't see the stormtroopers isn't ripped in half. They're killed or knocked out, but that's also because the armor is heavily optimized towards that specifically because that's what they've been facing. So from what I gather, it's like that. There's that one scene in Astartes, the fan film that got canonized, where the Astartes gets blasted by that rotary las gun.
Yes, the
and that leaves
Cannon.
right.
Yes, thank you.
And it leaves like a whole bunch of gouges.
Pock marks on them.
Yeah, well, a little bit more than like they look like there are gouges like big enough to fit your finger in. Obviously, it doesn't hurt them, but I think blasters would be something similar to that. Maybe a bit more damage, and obviously you can get to a lot bigger blasters.
The scene in
They don't just have blasters. Another thing I'm thinking is going to be in full production is the Empire. Sorry, I'm really struggling in my head with the names.
Yeah.
The Empire was trying to start putting disruptor weapons into mass production.
Yes.
And those will
I remember the Battle of Lausanne. Oh boy.
Yeah, no, those will absolutely fuck it. Honestly, I think a single shot would just give a Space Marine instantly.
Oof.
That is assuming the Empire are able to put disruptor tech into mass production.
I think they would, since they didn't lose at the Battle of Endor.
They didn't lose at the Battle of Endor, but it's a case of how fast the Imperium can move through the galaxy. You know what I'm saying? Because
so
if the Space Marines are moving as fast as they did in the Great Crusade, they're gonna have like a bit of a time crisis on their hand, if you get what I'm saying. They're gonna be racing against the clock to come up with some kind of wonder weapon.
All right, so
the speed that the Imperium operated on in the Great Crusade is rather slow as far as I'm concerned.
So let's go to that. So we've outlined general weapons tech as well, ground weapons, and from what I gather, the Empire has
also in VC text is the picture of the fucking engineer sidearm thing.
Yes.
And I also understand that there's going to be 40k and 30k nerds who are saying that I have not mentioned half of what is considered a general infantry weapon for the Imperium Army, let alone the specialized weapons that were available to the Space Marines.
We'll be fine. Yeah. Either way,
I don't have all of them on hand. I apologize.
But
it would be kind of silly to bring them all on hand, and generally, I don't think it will change things all too much.
Right.
There's a counter and a counter and a counter to each thing.
But overall, so from what I gather, is the Empire is outmatched, but it does have certain tools that can, if given enough time, they can get into production to level the playing field. So let's talk about that. So the way I set up this scenario is Alpha Legion and other infiltrators move in, they find some sort of corner in the unknown regions, probably around Rakata Prime, and they build up. Then they bring some of the other Primarchs as they're mopping up, and it's like, again, it's a gradual thing. They're mopping up the Milky Way and setting up more advanced forces here.
So
they set up.
If I could,
sure.
If I could bring up a tangent here, especially if we're coming this around Rakata Prime, and
I think that's the best.
Star Wars Legends against.
Oh yeah, I do want to specify that I am primarily trying to use Legends more than canon.
I think that's fine. I think that's fine.
No, that's also for the listeners. There are some stark differences.
Right, I think.
But I'm going to use Legends against itself right here, specifically when it comes to knowledge and things that are provided by KOTOR for those fans. And specifically the fact that within the Star Wars universe, it seems that humanity may not be native to that universe, and it was brought here and then eventually turned into slave labor either through the Mandalorian or through the Rakata Empire. And the Rakata Empire itself used a lot of genetic mutation to mess with humanity and to create other species, specifically species such as the Twi'leks, the Zabrak, the Chiss, many humanoid species within the Star Wars universe seem to have some sort of human connection. And if the Empire finds the Imperium starts around the Rakata Prime, and obviously being screw the Xenos, it destroys the Rakata. If they try to learn anything from them and find this out, you'd be surprised at how possibly the Empire is able to use its own propaganda to push into the Empire, because yes, it will be a human-based Empire, which will satisfy the muckety mucks of the Empire who are very much anti-alien. But if they can get certain alien races as considered stable mutations,
like abhumans,
like abhumans, say we declare the Twi'leks abhumans, we could apply the Zabrak abhumans, who are a stable mutation and are allowed within the Imperium, even have second-class citizens, especially considering those are very highly used as slave races within the Empire.
Right.
They would definitely see a possibly better life under the Imperium.
I see what you're saying.
I think the Empire, especially with the use of like the word bearers doing the propaganda thing that they were supposed to originally do, the Alpha Legion able to convert people, I think the Empire has a possibility of revolts within its issues.
Sure. All right.
Not
So
to mention the fact that if the Blood Angels are deployed, they would also be like very humane in spreading like a pro Imperium of Man thing, because as we know during the Great Crusade, the Blood Angels were extreme. Like, despite the fact that they were very barbaric in combat before Sanguinius showed up, when Sanguinius
civilize them.
integrated with the Blood Angels,
They did what the word bearers were supposed to do if the word bearers didn't become so religious.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
and then if we get Gilliman in there,
Mm-hmm.
we could possibly have entire planets within the Empire surrender
Arch Administrator.
due to political regions.
Yep. All right. So then let's talk about that. And so the way I imagine is, so what do you got? I'm looking at the map right now. Do you guys think Rakata and the unknown regions, which is relatively empty and very close to the core, would be a better starting vector, or would somewhere in the outer rim in the galactic south be a better?
So here's the other thing. If we were to start this and there's actually a wonderful example of this within Star Wars itself during the Old Republic when the Empire, or what would later become the Sith Empire, was banished from Korriban. They went to the unknown regions, found a single planet and built up, and then eventually became into its own power, came and invaded after KOTOR and created what is the premise for the game, for the MMO. That's technically Legends. At the same time, within Legends, there is a specific force being who may or may not be named and is currently an aboriginal horror.
This also implies that the hyperspace barrier is broken, in which case she would slaughter mostly everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's not.
I would put her on the level of the Ghoul Stars within 40K.
Right. Let's
For those who don't know, unfortunately, I don't know her name, but basically
Abeloth.
she is considered the mother of the Force.
She was human, and she basically invented a sin and fucked with the gods, and then
right.
It's the woman who was like the mother of the Mortis, like the Mortis.
That's her.
children.
That's her.
So the unknown regions, it could be a wonderful boon, but it could also be a curse if the Imperium were to invade. At the same time,
at this point in time, I think it would generally just be a curse because, well, Thrawn is there.
Honestly, yeah. So okay, so then let's Outer Rim is also like relatively empty. So then let's say they find some sort of sector on the periphery of the Outer Rim, and maybe they deal with some pirates, but overall they can take care of them relatively quietly. Dorn and Perturabo start setting up a fortified perimeter. Guilliman starts organizing in the influx of loyal citizens in the buildup of the infrastructure. And then from there, they slowly build up more and more and more. Meanwhile, the Alpha Legion and the Raven Guard go into... And so I'm looking at I'm thinking very south, very far galactic south. Like probably around that map that you posted, the PDF, probably around Anoth, Jeonju 5, those worlds. And then from the way I imagine is the hammer strikes, like once they're fully ready, they got that fortified perimeter, they got all the legions, all the ships that they need for the initial strike. Then they basically want to work their way northward, north and eastward.
So here's the other thing. Yes, the 40K universe is fully capable of cutting off these hyperspace lanes, which would be a major problem for the Empire, but warp travel is not beholden to these lanes.
It's not. But warp has its own lanes, doesn't it?
It does have its own lanes.
It's not necessarily lanes, because it's like, you can sail in an ocean, but... Well, it has lanes if you're assuming the warp is not calm. I'm assuming it's calm in the scenario, or calm-ish.
Calm-ish,
yes,
yeah.
Which also delineates the fact... Well, completely annihilates the fact that you don't need the Astra Telepathica then if the warp is calm. Because
you'd still need them because they need to find waymarks and shit.
They didn't have this during the time of human expansion. There was nothing in the warp for them to navigate for them. So they used other means.
We also don't know how those means worked. We do know, well, there are some bits of lore that's implied that they had their own version of like waymarks and beacons and stuff, but the Telepathica still searched through the warp for them as beacons and points of reference.
And we know that there is a way to artificially create these beacons. Yeah. Ergo, Guilliman creating his own beacon, which may or may not have led to 40K's doom with the Tyranids, but we're not going to go into that point.
Honestly, I'm just gonna assume that the Emperor is able to power some Astronomicon over here. Maybe he gets Magnus to power the one on Terra. Maybe he gets something else to work instead. But let's just say the Emperor is still able to guide the forces of the Imperium in the Star Wars galaxy, and they go relatively same speed as they were going during the Great Crusade. Overall, though, so the way I imagine this is they got 2.25 million Astartes, maybe 3 million Astartes, so a huge number, loads and loads of ships. Like I imagine pretty much most of the military equipment that they built up during the Great Crusade, they're routing here because their own galaxy is relatively pacified, and with that comes a whole bunch of strings, I know, but right now we're focusing on this. Imagine, them starting pretty south around the Corellian trade spine and the Hydian way, and essentially I've broken them down into several waves because and we're going to talk about the specific taxes and such, but in order for them to succeed, they're going to have to attack on a very wide front in a way that I haven't really seen the Primarchs do. And the first wave I imagine is be the Alpha Legion rushing ahead, infiltrating, trying to do sabotage, rise up, stir uprisings. Yes, rise up, stir. Yeah, my vocab. Nobody ever accused me of being smart.
We didn't.
Sabotage, identifying targets, and overall just going ahead. I also do not have any doubts that the Alpha Legion and probably even Alpharius himself can make their way really far up into the core and get information on the core worlds and stuff, but that's quite a ways away. Second wave, Night Lords, Raven Guard, White Scars, and maybe Emperor's Children, and this kind of has two wings to it. The Night Lords and the Raven Guard would be sent up to begin weakening some of the more fortified worlds. I guess Raven Guard could work alongside the Alpha Legion, but I imagine them being better at stealth attack rather than infiltration. Night Lords would be used to weaken some particularly fortified worlds that have been identified as susceptible to that type of tactic. You don't want to send the Night Lords in a world that you think you can convert. Instead, you'd send them to a world that's particularly disciplined, and you want to break down that morale. Whereas the White Scars, those two would go into infiltrate more built-up worlds, whereas the White Scars and Emperor's Children, known more for their skirmishing and light attack, they would kind of sweep in a wide arc against poorly defended worlds, kind of like the cavalry used to do. Whereas, the first two would hit the more hardened targets. Now the third wave. This is the true hammer. The Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Sons of Horse, Death Guard, Iron Hands, Salamanders, World Eaters. These are the guys who are going to begin really doing most of the conquering. The first two waves were kind of just identifying and weakening. These guys are the guys who are going to start taking the worlds. And then the fourth wave, Imperial Fists, Iron Warriors, Ultramarines, Warbearers, and Thousand Sons. The first two, pretty self-evident. These are going to be the Nutcrackers. You identify a critical stronghold that has so far been holding up the rest of the advance. You send in either of these two. I'd imagine you send the Imperial Fists against a fortress you want to conquer, and you send the Iron Warriors against a fortress you want to destroy. The Ultramarines, they'll be sent kind of later in because they shine in their administrative capability. So they will be working their darndest to integrate the newly conquered territory, finish off and integrate the newly conquered territory. Warbearers, the same thing, except rather than administration, they'd be focusing more on conversion and recruitment. And the Thousand Sons, they would kind of hang back to deal with any sort of weird things that happen. And that ties into the fact that this ties into how the Imperium views the Force. And we talked about that a little bit. And essentially,
Warp magic.
Pretty much, like for them, this whole galaxy is being run by unsanctioned psychers. There was a big purge a while back, and that's good, and that's part of the reason why they chose this moment to attack, since there's a lot fewer unsanctioned psychers. But this galaxy is still run by unsanctioned psychers. I'm sure the Empire is going to start recruiting Inquisitors like crazy, so the Thousand Sons would be held back to deal with those special threats.
That's the thing. This is also pre-Inquisition.
Yeah.
I mean the Empire.
Black Empire.
Yeah, the Inquisitors like the.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the guys who were basically like essentially mini Sith or whatever they called them, Sith acolytes. You still got the rule of two because you never break the rule of two. Always two there are.
Slaves are okay. Everything else is not.
Yeah.
Star Wars. I'm not speaking from personal experience.
Yeah. And so that's basically.
All right, I need a second. If you're gonna keep that one up.
Dear God. But yeah.
Since we've got a second, there is something incredibly fucking important, like, that has not been touched on whatsoever.
Sure.
Communication.
I don't follow. Astropaths still work, right?
Okay, so, you're in the military, right?
No. I'm in college.
You're not?
No.
Oh. Oh, that's right. Some of the other people here. Okay, so
So,
Star Wars, the Empire, they are able to send very detailed communications across the entire galaxy in seconds. That is not how it works for the Imperium.
Yep.
They have to send impressions, basically like
Yeah.
the psychic equivalent of hand gestures and miming.
Smoke signals. Smoke signals.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's less helpful than smoke signals because when a psyker tries to send a message, one, it can take days to months to years, potentially, and across a galactic distance, this is going to take a long time. It takes a very long time. They're sending psychic impressions. It's not a message. It's not like telekinetically talking with someone's like, yo, buddy, there's a problem here. We got this blah, blah, blah going on with blah, 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 blah. When the Tyranids came, a choir of psychers got the impression of a lot of people being eaten, and that was it. Like, they just kind of understood that, like, there was something that was hungry.
A voracious hunger, a tireless maul, ripping, gnashing teeth, and a good portion of them either died from the psychic backlash or were mentally scarred.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
a great deal of that is because of the shadow and the warp. Honestly, the way I see it is that, yes, the Imperium's communication is going to be a lot more fractured, as is their FTL, but that's also nothing they haven't dealt with. Like, they fought the whole Great Crusade like
Sure,
this.
it's not something they haven't dealt with, but they haven't dealt with anything that is, much better.
Oh, I see.
Substantially
Yeah.
better.
Okay, so then,
To
yeah.
that, I would argue that there were smaller groups that they did face that actually had better technology than them, and some
Like
of them
the
they were
Interrex.
able to integrate. The others they weren't because, unfortunately, of Xenotech.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those
one
groups
of the
held
bigger-
out really well against very
That's-
unlikely odds.
That's another point. The Imperium,
One of them being the Interrex.
right? The
Oh,
Imperium
God, I
never.
wish they didn't die.
The Imperium never dealt with the galactic spanning empire. They typically fought planet by planet, system by system, sometimes sector by sector, and they got their asses handed to them when they were fighting sector by sector. When they face something of this scale, which can move much faster, think much faster, so they're able to mass reinforcements.
The thinking much faster part here, I think,
Yes.
is incredibly important.
It is, yes, and
I would also argue that it is not 100% there because within Star Wars, okay, so both 40K and Star Wars have their own issues with AI.
yeah,
40K, there's abominable intelligence, and so because of that, we rely more on meat computers and other things along those lines. Star Wars does not have AI that it trusts either. The
Right.
closest that I think is IG-88, and that became a huge problem within Legends.
It became a very funny
not to
problem.
mention
That became a scale. That became almost an abominable intelligence, Dark Age of technology thing on itself.
right. Not to mention, there's a massive public backlash against any sort of droids and AI after the Galactic Civil War. And
Yes.
I was about to talk about that. Is could the Empire create masses of droid warriors to complement their numbers?
Yes, and they likely would. They don't really care too much about what the people think.
That is true. But okay, so then yeah. But either way,
Which once again would only help propagandists in getting people to join, or at the
Exactly.
very least consider the Imperium.
but at
The other question is, so moving faster, yes. Thinking faster.
kinda.
We got to remember that every Astartes is in 30K, more so in 30K because they're allowed a lot more independent thought than in 40K.
Mm-hmm.
Is the equivalent of a Sun Tzu on himself. The
When I
tactical
say
geniuses
thinking faster,
within.
I'm talking from the perspective of the Imperium and the Empire itself being two separate minds, and not the literal minds of the people within them. In terms of how fast information can cross between systems, things
Right.
be sorted out, and then go back and forth.
Right, but I think he's,
Okay, so in communication, which then brings the other concept of, are we considering within the area of the Imperium, do they consider the humanity here to be brought back into the fold and they're just rogue,
Absolutely.
or do they consider this a new galaxy to completely
No.
F over? Because
No.
that will determine whether or not they start to use their own technology against them and try to reverse
No.
engineer, or if everything is Xenotech and
to me
while it's not heretical, because heresy doesn't exist yet in 30K, it's not to be trusted
to
until
me, yeah, to
tested.
me, the worlds themselves and the humans themselves are definitely, lost remnants that need to be reclaimed and brought under the Emperor's, not quite light, but under the Emperor's tutelage. As for the technology, some of it's going to be hit or miss. I think a lot of the more mundane stuff, like blasters and stuff, yeah, I don't think the mechanics will have a problem. some of the droids.
The reason for this is because I think that is the linchpin for this entire fight as to whether or not Big E himself will be involved and how much the Imperium's might is thrown in here.
Right. Well,
because if this is not archaeotech, this is archaeotech. This is not heretical. This is to be trusted, and we are allowed to reverse engineer it. Guess what we have in the Star Wars universe that would motivate 40K to even be involved in this to begin with? That would cause all of the Imperium's resources to go to this.
Hyperdrives.
Yes, hyperdrives.
Bingo. A non-warp based travel. Which
Okay.
is the entirety. That is the crux. That is the reason for Big E abandoning the Crusade. That is what Big E wants.
Well, yeah, but
that
it's also,
is the reason for everything. And even if it is what we reverse engineer is slower, not effective, if it's not going through the warp, but it is capable of uniting and communicating within an empire, everything from the Imperium is going to get thrown at this.
honestly, yeah. Let's say that, but yeah, I'm trying to think.
I think that's probably more likely than trying to reunite humanity. Like that's a
Right.
second option, but that
Right.
is not exactly.
Now I'm trying to think. Like, is there any reason why the Mechanicus wouldn't go for it?
Well,
Kind of. I mean, the Mechanicus still has its own idealist factions. Some are, more against other technology than
Right.
other groups are. Yada yada. But it's not as bad as it is in 40K.
Honestly, yeah, I think the most likely, most logical is that they do recognize this to be, of human origin. I mean, we see clearly it's humans using this, so humanity at some point must have made this, which means it must come from the Omnissiah, and it's our duty to.
Guess who's going to immediately get put onto this? Archenland, which I know.
Who's that?
Funny name, for anyone who knows anything about 40K lore. But at the same time, that man was a genius to rival Call.
I don't think he was that funny of a name.
Well, no, the funny name thing is because his last
Also,
name is
didn't Cole
Land,
subsume him? No, wait.
it wasn't him.
Call
it
did
was
consume
someone else on the Space Marine project.
Ark and Lamb is the guy that made the Land Raiders, right?
Yeah, that's why it's funny because the Land Raiders are named after him, not because they travel on land. Yeah,
that's kind of
it is early to mid 80s bad GW writing.
I thought that writing had charm, but I have a lot of controversial opinions.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, yeah. So then at that point, that's the thing is, so the Imperium will go all hands on deck to try to reverse engineer that technology. But I think the gap between them acquiring this and actually having ships capable, it will take decades. Just because
it will take time,
right?
But that's going to be the difference between whether or not the Imperium gives up and comes back later, or they throw everything at this and will sacrifice not their firstborn, not their secondborn. We're talking sacrificing their fifthborn, and mom's already working on sixth.
Right.
To try and keep a foothold in this galaxy to learn more about the archaeotech.
Right, but don't you think that they would do that regardless? Because most of the colonies that they took over, most of the human planets they took over during the Great Crusade didn't have too much. I mean, they had some technology to offer, but not that much. And yet they still, sent thousands of Marines to their deaths, let alone,
but the context was also a bit different.
What was the con? I mean,
that was their own home galaxy. This is a far-off one.
Yeah, but
that was reclaiming what was lost.
In their minds, these are humans from Terra who made their way here during the Dark Ages.
It's more along the lines of do we see the Imperium being allowed to reverse engineer Star Wars technology, and if that is possible, which I don't see happening within 40K unless you suddenly have Call interested with Gilliman's approval. And that's modern day 40K. Like we go back to just before Gilliman, but this is 30K
now as well in modern 40K.
Yeah.
So I'm still reading up on this stuff. I know the Lions in Indominus, but does he really have full control over the Imperium and not Indominus?
No, he wants to. He wants to, but Gilliman refuses to do that because that's going to result in a civil war.
Wait, they've met yet? Because I'm still behind. I don't know if they've met yet.
Oh, that's the lore's. I think the lore's quite nice. Yes, they've met. They've gotten into a lot of arguments.
I thought
Call has a lot of power, but
you need to give me this the book information so I can read this because I would love an interaction. But sorry, we're going off on a tangent. And
basically, Gilliman doesn't give Imperial Nihilus to the Lion because he wants Dante to still be ruler, essentially. Because Dante is Gilliman's homeboy.
But actually, that makes a lot of sense, and I think the Lion would respect that because the Lion, when he first meets Dante, actually has a decent amount of respect for him.
Right. Either way, gents, off topic. So back to the invasion. So yeah, they start down south. How do you think? Yeah, how quickly do you think it'll take the Greater Crusade, as we'll call it? How long do you think it'll take them to actually progress up the galaxy?
How much time are you putting in between waves? That is a very important question, because like I said, with how information travels in Star Wars and in the Empire, they will likely have started fortifying and building up their own defensive force along the expected invasion route around the second wave.
I would say that they're moving pretty close together, because the hammer, it's kind of like Operation Barbarossa. Like, it all hits all at once. It's just that the Panzers rush ahead of everyone else. And, yeah, the Alpha Legion...
This also, so, to put this bluntly... I see this taking 100 years to 300 years, 500 years.
Right.
I see this taking a long time.
Right.
I also see the Empire trying its super weapons, but the Imperium adapting and eventually the resources not being there. Because the Empire is very much kind of like our own globalist world today. It is very much reliant on getting resources from other planets versus sourcing things locally.
Right.
One of the biggest resources for the Empire's navy to be built up in Kuat drive yards is not just raw materials from other mining planets. It's a lot of scavenged tech from places like Raxus Prime, other scavenge worlds where Venators have been trashed.
Right.
Well, I mean, that just makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you use that shit?
Right.
Why did you trash them in the first place?
They're not as good. There are subtle differences. The Empire is not as good.
I would argue that keeping the Venators around, especially as carriers, would work. But then again, that's also in Star Wars combat, where starfighters are a lot bigger of a problem. Whereas in 40k combat,
aircraft
fighters mean nothing.
Dude, from what I've seen, fighters in 40k are far more powerful than they are in Halo. Like,
fighters are extremely powerful, and they're useful when going on smaller ship-on-ship combat. But fighters provide openings and weaknesses for large ship combat to do something when it comes to 40k. Fighters themselves can take out entire capital ships. Star Wars.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I mean, that's kind of beneficial for the Imperium that the Empire doesn't put as great of an emphasis on fighters, so it kind of levels the playing field in that regard.
Well, that's the other thing. The differences in powers are going to be a huge difference because a Star Destroyer can be crippled by a fighter. You're not going to find a frigate being crippled by a fighter when it comes to 40k.
It's essentially whether it be
a Star Wars or
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
TIE Fighter Squadron goes up to the Imperial fleet and tries to do some Top Gun Maverick shit, only to get fly swatted by the defense cannons.
Well, what are the odds that after the Death Star's finished construction, something like the TIE Defender and such enters more common usage just because more funds
that likely would, because Thrawn was pushing for it, and there were some Imperial High Admirals and shit that were in favor of it, including Vader, I think.
Right, Vader.
We're still not talking very much, because if we were to put a comparison in fighters, let alone the actual ships themselves, Fury interceptors and Starhawk fighter bombers have a hard time doing anything to most ships unless they can get their void shields down, and that's usually their main thing. And even then, they have a problem doing up against escorts. These fighters and Fury. Okay, to give you an example. A TIE fighter, even a TIE Defender, is the equivalent of not a biplane, but is the equivalent of a rotary wing aircraft from World War II. Say a Spitfire or a P-51 Mustang or an Me-109. A Fury interceptor is like an F-4 Phantom if the F-4 Phantom were also mixed with a submarine, because even though most of the time it only has 2 crewmen, you can have up to 5, including an astropath.
Okay.
Not an astropath. Someone who communicates using the warp. Yeah, no, that is an astropath. And it has both toilet, sleeping quarters, and the possibility. Now these are small; these are cramped. This is not
Well, that sounds more like the Big Boy Longsword, which has a crew of 4: pilot, co-pilot, weapons officer, and Never.
Yeah, and that's the standard fighter, and it has missiles underneath of it that can be
I'm going to
possibly
say that I think
nuclear.
a TIE Defender would absolutely shit on a Fury.
I think
It would outmaneuver it, but it would not be able to out-firepower it. And the fact that
I
most
think the
Furies come
firepower
with void
itself-
shields is an issue.
Well,
Combine that with the fact that the missiles, it would be like a World War II plane going up against not even an F-22, like an older F-4 Phantom. The missiles alone would be able to lock on the thing and destroy it.
TIE Defenders have...
I think the Defender would outrun the missiles. It also has its own version of missiles, some of which are in the 15 kiloton range.
It's got missiles, and it's also got shields. And
it's got missiles, shields. It's capable of faster than light travel.
Yes, and
I think it's got 8 blaster cannons.
It's got 6. It's got 4. It's got
to fucking balk at.
It's got 4 heavies, and it's got 2 ion cannons, which are disruptors. So.
Well, ion cannons aren't disruptors. They function very differently.
So I meant like energy, like EMP weapons. That's what I meant.
Let me see if I can look up the Fury, because I remember having this. It has a bunch of different missiles, las cannons.
But overall,
I
think
heavy las cannons.
From what I'm seeing,
they are a thing. I would say that maybe all TIEs have maneuverability over this, but speed is not something I would say they have.
I would
durability and armor
give it
is
speed.
TIEs are known as being remarkably fast.
They are remarkably fast, but there are different issues.
Mm-hmm. Either way,
let's see if I can look it up. Unfortunately, I have too many tabs open.
Either way, while you're looking that up, so it's going to be a very long, drawn-out thing. Now, this is also all Primarchs in concert. Ultimately, the battle comes. We talked about all this. We talked about the naval advantage, and we say it's about even. We talked about the ground troops. The Imperium clearly takes it, but the Empire can develop certain technologies. No, can expand on certain developed technologies to minimize that gap. Ultimately, it comes down to this. The Imperium is going to be taking a very long time. Can the Imperium's slowness give the Empire time to catch up, and in the long term, and time to outmaneuver the Imperium in the short term? Maximize mass warships on the key areas that are being attacked, since their FTO is so much faster and their communications is so much faster. Essentially have like one big fleet roving around danger zone to danger zone. Can that happen?
I genuinely think that if the Imperium cannot conquer the Star Wars galaxy in less than 200 years, it is fucked.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, 200 years, that's not unrealistic in my opinion. It took them around 200 years to conquer the bulk of their galaxy, but that was also starting like that to gain the resources as they took over. Over here, they already have.
May I just interject slightly?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't even I would say all the Imperium needs to do in the Star Wars galaxy is effectively eliminate the Empire to a point where they are essentially dead in the water. And if you don't mind my saying, Pockets, that's what I think the Alpha Legion would do from reconning, from in-depth reconnaissance. They would assess that the Empire, after Palpatine is dead, does not have any true line of succession. So eliminating Palpatine would send the Empire into complete logistical disarray.
Right. That's the other thing. The Empire, the logistics of the Empire is very much based off of the logistics of the Nazi Party from World War II. That's why I keep bringing up World War II, because Star Wars is based around a lot more around World War II.
Again,
whereas
we can't
40K is based upon the breadth of human history.
Right. We can't really say the N-word. The other N-word? Can we say Hitlerites instead?
Oh, that N-word.
I said the Yahtzee Party.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just call them the Hitlerites.
What, you never played the dice game Yahtzee?
Yahtzee!
Either way.
Sorry.
Why does that say... I'll be honest, why does that sound Jewish? I know the context is terrible.
Either way.
Whatever, yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
But a lot of it, because it's all very much, it's based around Bad Mustache Man.
Yes.
It's all based around Palpatine.
Right.
The logistics themselves, a lot of the different Grand Moffs were competing with each other for logistics. They were competing for resources. That's only going to become worse when 40K invades.
The way I see
30K,
it,
the Imperium invades.
Right. The way I see it, if Palpatine goes down, it's a civil war between Tarkin and Vader. If all three of them go down, it's a civil war between 20 different admirals and moths. So,
I would say civil war between Thrawn and Tarkin. with Vader actually.
Assuming Tarkin, Vader, and Palpatine are all killed in one swift, decisive Alpha Legion attack.
Right. Is that possible? Like, do you guys think the Alpha Legion can successfully take down all of these guys?
I do not think they can take down the Emperor or Vader. Thrawn, maybe. If they get to Thrawn, then like Thrawn's capable, but he's not physically capable enough to deal with space.
No, Marines. but Thrawn's a useful adversary to keep
he's
around.
very Thrawn's
he can go to a corner of the universe and keep what he wants.
Dude.
Thrawn, while he likes the Empire, is still very loyal to the Chiss, the Ascendancy.
Right.
He's very loyal to the Chiss, but he will not. I do not think whatsoever that he would not help the Empire, because I absolutely believe he would understand that the Imperium would take the whole galaxy, including the Chiss Empire, under its thrall.
Not to mention
the Chiss Ascendancy.
Here's the thing.
He would not abide by that.
I personally think that that Thrawn attention, like if we're speaking like if his fleet went up against a Space Marine fleet, I do think Thrawn's in a lot of trouble if it's like one of the Primarchs who is extremely gifted in fleet combat.
Believe it or not, I think the one person who would give Thrawn the biggest run for his money is actually Jagged Icon.
I think the biggest one would be the Emperor, honestly.
Well, the Emperor,
and
I
say this because
I don't think Thrawn is that.
No.
I mean, he's proficient.
Hold on. He listened to a man play an orchestra for 3 hours, and from him listening to that, he wrote down on a fucking notepad instructions that he gave to his CEO after he was captured by an enemy Imperial commander. Instructions for his CEO to 1v3 his fleet, and she won.
Okay. He's got greater feats of knowledge.
Yes, but we also know that Thrawn, within his own, this is also within his own universe and understanding. The 30K ships are going to be an unknown for Thrawn, a major unknown for them.
In terms of technology, yes, but like his stuff comes from being able to look at things and figure out like the people behind them rather than the tech. Even then, he is frighteningly capable of deducing how technology works.
Nah, they're going to learn
to tamper with them.
The Empire is going to learn very quickly, just because they got so much room to spare. Like, they got so much land to give, just like the Russians. They'll figure out pretty quickly what the Imperium's MO is and how they attack. And I mean, again, they're starting in the Outer Rim. There's a lot of planets to... I mean, obviously the Outer Rim has quite a bit of economic significance, but there's still a lot of land to give. Not to mention, these were the Separatist holdouts, so these aren't exactly the most loyal cream of the crop. So I think they're going to learn. I think Thrawn and the boys are going to learn very quickly how the Imperium operates, and they're going to counter that pretty well. And
it's not just how it operates.
I'm sorry, but I still don't like. Don't get me wrong. Thrawn is man is capable of doing Sun Tzu, level of being a commander. But as I said before, especially when the Primarchs or even the captains of the Astartes companies get involved, they are themselves also on that level.
Yeah, but a lot of them were dumb enough to sell their souls to hell. So I don't.
Before we go for the dumb enough to sell the soul to hell,
fuck you, Erebus.
Well, yeah.
Well, yes, screw Erebus.
We can't.
But also, there's an immense amount of loyalty that has been trained and built into them, especially for the Astartes. So when the Primarchs themselves, who are already to an extent very scarred from their experiences of being taken away from Terra and thrown to the warp and then to their home planets, and certain home planets were worse than others. They are
Barbarossa.
What?
I'm sorry.
Barbarossa.
Barbarossa.
I think it was Mortarian's homeworld.
I think something else.
Yeah. They were staying loyal to their Primarchs. It was just inbuilt into them. So that's not so much stupidity.
I know.
For lack of a better term, it's and I hate that this is a thing in Star Wars now, being someone who grew up on the Republic Commando series and preferred them to be more imprinted than the goddamn command chip. It's kind of like Astartes have the control chips to be loyal to the Astartes have a control chip, for lack of a better term, to be loyal to their Primarchs. Is it true? No. It's much more basically like how Star Wars used to be before the control chip, but it's still a huge psychological.
No, I get that. I was just memeing.
Built-in thing.
Now, speaking of that, where do you guys think Vader, the Emperor, and Palpatine, we'll call him Palpatine because the Emperor is the Emperor, the God Emperor of mankind, what do you think them and their trained Inquisitor acolytes stack up compared to Space Marines, Primarchs, Custodes, Big E, all that good stuff?
Most of the Inquisitors don't stack up against Space Marines whatsoever. Maybe some of their force powers might put them on some level as being close to the neophytes, but no. Vader, I do think, has a good point, but he might go up against a chaplain or an honored veteran.
I think Vader could honestly kill a Primarch.
I don't know if
I would argue against that. He is the strongest in the Force. In the Star Wars universe,
I will say I don't get that. Like there's a lot of lore. Sorry, there's a lot of out of context lore stuff that says Vader's the strongest, but some of the shit we've seen from a lot of other Force users, including Palpatine, is
Palpatine's
fucking horrifying.
Wait, guys, Palpatine's
but that's mostly limited by the fact that Vader himself is in a psychological bubble because unfortunately he feels because unfortunately the Force goes on feeling sometimes. Feels that he is weaker without his limbs. Therefore, he self-limits himself in a way kind of like a placebo effect when it comes to medication. You believe you're healed, so you are healed.
Oh.
That's with Vader.
Also,
so that's why he can sometimes be this uber powerful Ubermensch. Sorry for using that word.
I don't think that's a bad word. It does have a literal meaning that is very accurate here.
Superhuman. Versus, sometimes he is literally a whipped dog into Palpatine.
Sure.
But at the same time, he also has this psychological master-apprentice thing with Palpatine, so it's almost like he's letting himself be this whipped dog.
One quick point about Vader. So Palpatine, as soon as Vader got crispied, as soon as Vader got deep-fried, as soon as Vader got well done, Palpatine was like, well, this is not quite the apprentice I wanted. I'm going to try to find a new, better apprentice. And so Palpatine secretly trained up all these other guys, and Vader butchered all of them. All of the potential replacements, Vader murdered. So Palpatine eventually realized, okay, I'm kind of stuck with this guy, Matt.
That was canon, I believe. In Legends, he was more or less satisfied, if disappointed.
Right.
But he used it to nurture his hatred.
The reason why I say this is because...
Honestly, if we're going to bring Legends into this, the one person who I'm more afraid of than any of the others is Starkiller.
I don't want to deal with that.
Starkiller is actually weaker than Vader.
Yeah, either way.
Yes, but he's such a loose cannon that it would be interesting.
I don't want to deal with it. Either way, the reason why I was saying the whole Vader thing, though, is because Palpatine was developing a better suit for him that was far more agile. He was kind of just put Vader in the big-ass, bulky, super slow suit just to mess with him, and he thought Vader would be a temporary guy until he found someone better. But Vader just proved himself so capable, so he said, all right, I'll give him a proper suit that's far less clumsy. He never got around to transferring into that because of the events of, the original Star Wars movies. But
Vader refused, actually.
Oh, he refused because, it was dangerous. But I think in this timeline, facing freaking Space Marines and Primarchs, I think Vader may undergo that, and he may have a great deal of his agility back, plus his imposing stature, plus his strength, plus his, lightsaber. Because think, back to what you guys are saying about the Inquisitors, I think the Inquisitor, power weapons are definitely on par with lightsabers, but that's reserved for, leadership and stuff. So I think baseline Astartes will actually, they will struggle against Inquisitors who can use the Force to block their bolters.
No, they can't.
Might I add to this?
Yes, go ahead.
A Space Marine's agility, if we're saying a Space Marine and an Inquisitor manage to get into close combat with one another, a Space Marine's agility and reaction time is noted in the code, at least the Army codexes. I own a few of them, so I may have to look through them just to make sure my information is correct. But if I'm not mistaken, in the 9th edition Space Marines Codex, it's stated that the Space Marines' reaction time is within nanoseconds, if not microseconds.
That really doesn't stack up to Force users who, their reactions partially come from being able to see into the future.
Right.
So I would argue, especially when the Space Marines at least are on par with some of the better Force users, if not better than some of the lower end. As for the whole blocking bolters, Even within the Star Wars universe, kinetic weaponry and slug throwers is the best thing to use against them because they cannot be deflected or dealt with by the lightsabers, and they're usually too fast for the Force users to evade.
Yeah, but
if a bolt round
the
goes
Force
through
users don't really have a
it's gonna
problem evading them. It's just a problem because they can't block.
Right. No, blocking is going to be a big no-no.
It's a case of if a bolt round gets quote blocked by a lightsaber, if the lightsaber comes in contact with it, it's just going to turn into like this big molten chunk of lead, which is going to explode on impact, assuming it doesn't already explode once it comes into contact with the lightsaber.
So it's going to be really nasty. But I think... Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, if you get like... Because Space Marines rarely operate alone, Inquisitors tend to operate alone all the time. If you get like a squad of 10 Marines stumble upon one Inquisitor, that Inquisitor is fucked.
Okay. I would even say a team of 5. Especially because one of the biggest things...
Standard doctrine is 10 guys, that's why I said 10.
I know. Sorry, I'm still thinking military modern day squad is 8 to 10, a team is half that, but either way. The other thing is, where was I going with this? I've lost it because I went into a hole and thinking the other way.
Inquisitors aren't really anything special.
Okay.
Like, that's the main thing. You can... Force users can also use the Force to augment their physical abilities, both in terms of speed and strength, such as being able to do a standing 10-mile long jump. But...
Yeah, but that's...
Okay, so that was the other thing I wanted to bring up that I now just remembered. A lot, especially within lightsaber forms, a big thing about is disarming and disabling your opponent by cutting off limbs.
Yes.
We have seen Marines lose limbs and continue to fight as though they didn't do a damn thing.
Yeah, that's for Jedi, and that's because of their weird, stupid fucking... I hate the Jedi. Fuck the Jedi.
Yeah, fuck the Jedi.
Yeah, no, that's a Jedi thing.
Sith are superior, fuck the Jedi.
But we have seen Marines lose entire parts of their body, and the only time that they go down and stay down is usually when you lose their head. And
Iron
if there
hands
is an
go
input, they are mid-swing, they are something like that. They are still finishing that swing as they lose their head.
If that mass hits you, I'm sorry, it's gonna hurt.
Now, I don't know if you guys remember, there was this one scene in the 2003 Clone Wars cartoon where I think it was Obi-Wan or Samuel L. Jackson loses his lightsaber, so he's forced to deal. so he's forced to.
He is not He is Samuel L. Jackson, but he is not allowed to say his famous line.
Yeah. So he
say it. We all know the one.
Yeah, but he loses his lightsaber and he has to deal through an entire droid army just by force punching and kicking them. And
No, that's Samuel L. Jackson. That's
that is Mace Windu. That is during an episode where they're dealing with some sort of super weapon that causes earthquakes.
A thumper.
Right. Yeah, the mighty thumper. So basically,
I'm going to argue, if you're going to say that they can punch through a Marine, no, because that is Durasteel, and people have actually been able to create, or at least do the math on what Durasteel is, and it's only like 30% stronger than the steel that we can make, the higher carbon steel that we can make nowadays. That is not going to add up to ceramite or adamantium.
I don't know, Chief. Ceramite is basically just like...
Ceramite is also a brittle material.
It is pretty brittle.
Which would help punch through it.
Honestly, I mean, ceramite...
Yes, but we're also talking inches to maybe a foot thick.
It's not a foot. It's inches, it's not a foot. There's no way. Don't get me wrong, the chest piece is
very... Terminator?
Oh, yeah.
Terminator, yeah, but... I think you're talking about regular baselines. Yeah, Terminator is different. No, we're gonna struggle. Also, that's another thing though. While the technology seems more advanced than 30K, a lot of stuff is a lot less prevalent. Most legions only had enough Terminator suits for their first company, right?
Oh yeah, no, but the Dreadnought.
Oh yes, Contemptor Dreadnoughts and Nocturne Terminators, the greatest suits in Warhammer. Yeah, Vulcan's gonna be around. He's gonna be.
What about the Dreados?
What's the what?
They're actually something called the Dreadnought. Basically, they were meant for fire support and long range fires. The Daradeo, thank you.
Never heard of that. Sounds made up.
They're bigger than the average Dreadnought. They were just as flexible as some of the earlier models, but instead of having arms, they basically had
guns.
Big fuck off cannons.
Guns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Contemptors are pretty cool though. I do like the Contemptors for 30K. Like our boy Rylanor had.
Again, I'm trying very hard not to curse. I'm sorry.
What, you don't like Contemptors?
No, I'm trying not to curse, so you don't have to bleep me as much.
I don't get money anyway, so I think I'll be fine. Either way, so yeah, basically, yeah. Is there anything else that we got to add to this scenario? Basically,
Tigers, like Space Marine librarians, assuming that they're around at this time.
Oh yeah, no. If the Council of Nicaea edict is lifted somewhat for dealing with these unsanctioned psychers, librarians and a good portion of them would definitely listen. If we're going just to talk baseline Marines, then yeah, the Vader would be able to deal with some baseline Marines, and you're going to end up having to deal with some veterans and some other stuff. But I would definitely think that librarians would be able to deal with Vader. I don't think you need a Primarch to deal with Vader, but I guarantee you there's going to be one or two Primarchs who are going to look at Vader and go, challenge!
Yes.
Specifically, I was going to go more the Lion, and if the Lion gets his hands on Vader, that's not a...
I genuinely think that Vader could kill the Lion.
No,
I don't think... No. I could think that the Vader could give a good thrashing to Lorgar. The Lion moves, he doesn't think.
That is true.
There is no way to tell the future with the Lion because he doesn't even know what he's doing, but it happens.
Conrad learned that the hard way, yeah.
Then if you have Sanguinius or Conrad, then if you have Sanguinius or Conrad who can also somewhat tell the difference of the future, almost like a Force user, you have someone who's on par.
Hold on. If you've been reading, like, you read the Horus Heresy, like, that shit more than me, because, like, I don't particularly care for it, but you do recall...
Oh, no, you did not say that, buddy. I
like 40k more.
Alright, keep going.
I like 40k more than 30k.
I know.
But, do you remember the bit with, the Sigillite, Horus, and the two other Primarchs where he made them kneel?
Oh, yeah.
I do. I also know that he did not make them all kneel. He made the Horus kneel, and the other two Primarchs that were there were the Khan.
Yeah, that's right. They were worried he was going to kill Horus.
Yes,
right.
Were the Khan and Alfarius.
Yes.
Yeah.
The two other Primarchs who were the least psychically gifted, but actually probably had like the most passive psychic abilities.
What do you mean?
With probably... Okay, so the Primarchs are all hinted at as having psychic abilities, some of them being active, some of them being passive.
Yes. Dorn drowns the warp around him and stuff like that, yeah.
Dorn is basically the equivalent of being a blank without being a blank.
Yes.
Corvus Corax can literally turn invisible and be forgotten about in people's eyes without actually doing that.
But yeah, also turn into a Raven Demon.
No.
Yes.
No. The Raven Demon. The Raven Demon's active. He's not literally turning invisible, but like people forget that he's there, like he were a blank. Yes.
But I'm bringing this up because it's like Vader isn't too stupid. He's not that stupid or arrogant. I do not think there is anything that the Lion could do to stop him from being crushed with the Force. I genuinely believe there's nothing most of the Primarchs can do about that.
I mean,
Sanguinius, I think, could literally beat Vader, if I'm being completely honest with you.
I would give a lot of the Primarchs the ability to outthink or outmaneuver Vader, just because Vader is considered a strategic savant back when he is Anakin during the Clone Wars. It's not that hard to be a strategic savant during the Clone Wars. Especially considering how half of his strategic savant is clones keep up, and he barely somehow through sheer luck is keep up, and he's basically just doing blitzkrieg tactics without the armor to keep him in there.
Speaking of force usage, Palpatine had some big guns stashed away. Man was able to summon warp storms. I don't know if that was just like a power up he got for the Dark Empire, but man had powers. Man
he was a Sith sorcerer.
Sith
sorcery is very akin to.
I think that puts
sorcery within 40k.
I think that puts him on par with Magnus. Maybe I don't think.
No.
Yes. Put Palpatine on the Golden Throne. We'll see.
Potentially above, because Palpatine was capable of ending all life on worlds.
Was he actually?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, and
he's not the only Force user that's capable of that.
Yeah, Lorgar was able to create entire warp storms.
That was more so ritual
sectors.
That was more so
sectors, entire sectors.
That wasn't him. That was more so rituals to summon aid from the warp. He wasn't. His powers...
Which is exactly what Palpatine is doing. He's basically performing rituals to summon aid from the Force.
I don't know if it's that direct.
Not really, because a lot of it is about like the personal power that they have, and not all of his abilities are,
Well,
not
here's
all of
the other
these
thing.
things were taken from
Neither,
rituals. Like
but
his
here's
force lightning was
Right. Here's the-
powerful enough and had enough range to fucking strike an entire world.
Well,
Not
here's
from
the
another
other-
world, but while he was on it.
Yeah, but there's the other two things to continue or to contend with when it comes to this. Neither the warp nor the force are going to be able to counter each other because they are not going to be able to interact with each other.
Right.
So you're not going to have a moment
Or-
like in the god awful sequel trilogy where both people are forcing against each other while simultaneously trying to pull a lightsaber to each other.
Right.
These powers are not going to have an effect on each other. Combine that with the fact that mass is still a thing, and I'm sorry, the Primarchs may want to take on Vader, but you shoot Vader enough times and Vader's going to fall.
I mean,
Especially if you're using kinetics versus blasters.
Maybe. Either way, gents.
I mean, if Vader takes one bolt to the chest, he's gone, in my opinion.
No, his
Yeah.
his suit was pretty durable. He took glancing blows from lightsabers. His suit was very
yeah, but that's not too difficult to do given, general laws of physics. A glancing blow is not the same as a direct blow.
It's
The
not
only
direct-
part of him that would absolutely survive a bolt through is his right hand.
Yep.
Yeah, any
That's
mechanical
harsh.
part. But if he gets hit center mass, he's fucked.
Maybe. Maybe. Bolter, yeah. I thought you said like blaster.
Oh,
bolt.
he said bolter.
Yeah, no, if it's a bolter, then probably, yeah. Bolters are basically 20 millimeter semi-armor piercing high explosive 20 millimeter
Yeah.
grenades. Yeah, so it's pretty scary. Either way,
Well, yes and no. They're more like RPGs.
yes,
but
they're self-propelled. They're self-propelled.
Combine that with also the fact that las guns do not have a reaction time that allows you to block stuff. They are lasers. They are true lasers.
They are true lasers, but what about force precog?
Beam of light.
Like, precog does a lot of work.
I think
And it doesn't work by reading someone's mind. It works by telling you, "Oh, this is about to happen," and the
Right,
stronger
so I
you on
think-
the force, the
I think-
stronger
I-
the precog is.
Right, I think
I'm
precog
not
will
going to
tilt.
argue that. All I'm going to say is full auto and at least a platoon's worth of las guns aimed at his head.
That is
which
true.
Balls.
So, Jen, from what I'm gathering, the Imperial leadership is not going to be able to stand up. They do have a great deal of tactical advantages, and they have the time advantage since they move so much faster. But from what I gather, it'll be a slugfest, but they will eventually be pushed up and up and up from the outer rim up north. They're going to move into the mid-rim, inner rim, colonies, and then they're going to push their way through the core. And after that, it's going to be a mop-up to take the northern parts of the Tindril Arm, or whatever it's called. And
Well, to
It may-
also point this out, there's also going to be whether or not the Star Wars universe wants to reverse any Imperium technology, which there are advantages to doing that. The other thing is how long this takes.
Yep.
Can people be brought over through propaganda? Can there be an exception of the abhumans to get them? Which there is a wonderful little GIF that's constantly playing on my screen now of the one werewolf-looking Jedi who is going through the droids. And all I'm going to say right now is, if the Imperium accepted Beastmen, they might accept his
yeah,
race.
from what I gather, from what I get,
Combine that with the fact of
Oh, that
the
man
Star
right
Wars
there.
universe could reverse engineer some things. They could hold up a bigger fight.
they could
And
also
I also
develop
would
more
say
technology.
this: out of all the sci-fi universes that could have been done this, the Star Wars universe would be the one universe to give 30 and 40K its biggest challenge.
Right.
I honestly don't think 30K could take it, mostly due to industry and
Yes.
the reaction time on the side of the Empire.
Honestly-
they could push in, yes, but then the Empire would be very capable of pushing out, especially if the Imperium doesn't take it fast enough. Via like I said,
Which they can't.
within
They
200
can't
years,
take-
if they don't get it, they're screwed, because then they're going to have to be dealing with droids that are von Neumann probes. They're going to have to be dealing
Right.
with ships that can literally survive supernovas. They're
And
going to
then-
have to be dealing with the droids that can survive nukes
And then they're just going to slowly
and
grind
legions
themselves.
and mass productions. The
Right.
galaxy, the Empire has access to more planets, more
Right.
But
resources.
We also got to remember that 30K itself was a major advancement in technology
It
for
was,
the Imperium of
because they had
Man.
the Emperor.
There was a lot of advancement during that time period, and I
Right.
guarantee you that they would be able to, if not match, at the very least slowly creep up on them within the Star Wars universe. It's only in 40K, after many years of stagnation, that we see this.
With how Star Wars
heretical-
has weird tech jumps and what we've seen in lore,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that. I don't think that they're going to be able to.
I
Like,
would argue that
open
Star
up
Wars
fast
also
enough.
has its moments of stagnation. It has its
It
moments
does have
where
its
it goes
moments of
backwards.
stagnation,
Original
but we
trilogy.
do know the time period we're working with.
Either way, gents, from what I see,
I personally think. Sorry, just to
yeah, no,
give
go
my
ahead.
opinion on who would win.
Mhm.
I personally think the Imperium has more going for it. It just really depends on how they decide
Right.
to conduct themselves. I think that they can win, and more in most cases they will. But if I think the most, I think like the method that they should employ for the most swift and decisive victory would be decapitating the leadership of the Empire as their first move and then moving in. I do think that if they don't do that, they can eventually win, but the most quick and decisive victory will probably be, killing Palpatine, Tarkin,
Right.
and Vader
And it's,
first as
I
like
think,
I
their
agree
first
with
action.
that.
and I think that may be relatively difficult to do against Palpatine.
Well-
I mean, Tarkin and Thrawn could probably go down pretty easily, but
Well-
Vader's going to be a challenge. Maybe put Alpharius versus Vader, but Palpatine, I think Palpatine's going to be very. You're not going to sneak up on the guy, and you're also not going to be able to overpower him unless you send like freaking.
All you really need to do is just exterminate out his Coruscant. There you go.
I was about to say, yeah.
Well, it's going to be relatively difficult to get to Coruscant all the way because they're starting like on the edge, on the galactic edge. So you'll have to transport relatively large ships halfway across a very unknown and very large galaxy, and then drop off some very expensive munitions there. I think that'll be
I
relatively.
still want to argue that
All
when
you
it
need
comes
is one
to the
ship to exterminate out his
40K,
Coruscant.
I also want to say when it comes to 40K, the escort classes are the same size, can definitely take the same beating as the mainstay Star Wars ship. And
Sure.
while we can argue left all day
Yeah.
whether or not the escorts are pointing out more than the Star Destroyers
Sure.
between the two of them, we can argue that the people can do math, the kilotons, the ranges.
Yeah.
The fact that the escort class ships are the same as the mainstay ships within Star Wars, even though the Imperium is slower, it's going to be an invading force being hit by hit and run tactics from another force. And the only
Right.
time that hit and run tactics really wear down another force and really keep them from advancing is when they are distracted somewhere else, like with the American
I don't
Revolution.
think
The
the
British
Empire
were
is going to use hit and run tactics, though. Maybe at first, but like within a year, within 2 years, I genuinely think it's just going to be like
I think
and that's where the Imperium excels.
it's going
in
to
the
be them
slog.
pushing.
honestly, I think both sides are gonna be using hit and run tactics behind each other's backs. So I think the Alpha Legion is going to do wonders reconnecting the disconnected rebel cells who had their leadership decapitated, and they might also be able to convince some of the what they consider abhumans to fight for the Imperium. At the same time, though, much of the human population of the Empire will see this as a foreign invasion. And I think a great deal of the aliens might also side with the Empire because they'll see how brutal the Imperium is to non-human, non-abhuman aliens. Like, the Empire treats them pretty badly. The Imperium wants to genocide them. So
Can I also put this one point in, and just to gentlemen, we have fans from both series here.
Yes.
Rio is, I can definitely say, much more 40K than I am, and the man is not going to budge. Heister is not going to budge on Star Wars. I am someone who grew up on both. I grew up more on Star Wars, but came to love 40K later in life, and I actually would say that because 40K has been a little more extra and other things, I come to probably love it equally, if not more, than Star Wars. I've given both sides on both points, and I'm kind of a little bit of the middleman here, despite the fact that I end up saying more for 40K just because I can articulate it more.
It's just, for me, I genuinely think that, like, on a relatively short timetable, the Empire's ability to move faster and communicate faster is just an overwhelming advantage.
And that's the thing. Ultimately, we're not supposed
everyone's going to have their own points. No one's going to concede.
Right.
Fans are going to be of each fan series. We can agree to disagree and go
Right.
for this. What I will say, however, the one thing about this that's meant to be funny, and laugh at it if you will, the Empire within Star Wars is basically a bunch of posh British guys because they all have that accent.
That
the
is
Imperium is most definitely
I don't
way
know why
too
they have
freaking.
that accent.
And the Imperium is way too Cockney and British. And let's be honest here, it's the British Empire what wants to be versus the British Empire that actually was.
We
and
all
who
know
are the
that the
Brits
real
really
British
going to
Empire
fall
has
on the
green
side?
screen.
I get that. And ultimately, the best we can do with
So who's drinking the Amazak? Who's drinking the Star Wars version of it? And when is the tea coming out?
Sure, but ultimately,
Crumpets.
the best thing we can do is just lay out all the points and then let the fans decide for themselves. But ultimately, Space Marine boarding parties are going to be a massive nightmare for the Empire to deal with. Ultimately,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I don't think the Empire Galactic Civil War has anything to combat a Space Marine boarding party in
Right.
terms of like
At first,
heavy hitting things,
right?
Like aboard most Star Destroyers. Like if a Space Marine boarding torpedo manages to breach a Star Destroyer, that Star Destroyer is fucked.
Right.
Like they're fucked.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, and yeah. Ultimately, that's the thing. Can the Imperium moves very slowly, so can the Empire, with the time that they've got and the space that they're willing to trade, can they develop technology or expand on the technologies they're developing to counter that? And ultimately, we'll let it up to the fans. I'm leaning towards this is going to be a very slow and very costly invasion, but I think the Imperium can eventually conquer the Star Wars galaxy in. I think maybe they can get the upper hand over 200 years, and after that, after they take out the leadership, they can mop everything up over another 300 years. Now, if the Imperium is able to push them back, then if they're able to fully rid them out of our galaxy, then we talk about the Empire being on the offensive, and that's where our next episode is going to be about. Can the Empire move into the 41st millennium galaxy and conquer the Imperium? I'm not quite sure what moment in the 41st millennium to take. Maybe you guys can help me out with that. Maybe the fans can help us out with that. Whether it should be before the Necrons and the Tyranids or after. Whether it should be,
I think the biggest question is it before the Great Rift or after?
That's the thing. Is it early? I'm leaning more early on, since I want the focus to be more so. Obviously, you can't have M41 without the setting, and thus without all the Xenos present. But at the same time, do you want the Tyranids? Do you want the Great Rim, Great Rift? Do you want the Necrons?
I'm honestly, I don't really want to argue too much about that, because let's be honest here, the orcs win all.
Yeah, so I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I'm leaning towards earlier. I think we'll let the fans put in their input, but I'm gonna lean towards having the fight be earlier on in the 41st millennium, before all these shenanigans happen with the Necrons, Tyranids, Primarchs, Great Rift, whatever. And yeah, let's say they find their place in some corner, some more stable corner of the galaxy. We'll have to look in depth at the Warhammer Galaxy and find a place where the Galactic Empire shows up, and then can they, conquer the 41st millennium? All right, folks, thank you very much for watching. Any final notes or points?
You mean listening? This is a podcast.
This was a podcast. Also, I may or may not have forgotten to hit the record button until the first 10 minutes, so I'm gonna have
In fact, I thought about asking you. I didn't.
Yeah, the first. So I think we lost the first 10 minutes, but don't worry. We've been recording for the grand majority of this, so I'll fill in. If you guys want to re-record your introductions, we can do that.
I'll just put what happened in the first 10 minutes on a sticky note. They can read that.
Sure. Or I'll just go. All right. Either way, folks. Any last points and you want to say, and also just what's the opposite of extroducing yourself? Like, just say who you are on your way out, basically.
I mean, I just want to quickly summarize my general view of. I think that if the Imperium is not capable of decapitating Imperial leadership in a quick, decisive strike at first, I personally believe that they will get about a third to half of the way through and then be repulsed.
Okay, that was Heister's idea. Heister, he was not the terminal cancer patient. He was the guy trying to find morality. Was it?
I am the overall arbiter and judgment of what is moral.
Exactly. All right, next up, Jiffy, what are your final thoughts?
I am the terminal dying patient of cringe, not cancer, but
Okay.
Thank you for my Make-A-Wish contest. Damn close. The bullet is currently going straight towards my heart. No.
Condolences. Future condolences.
Listen, the Star Wars universe was probably the best chance at beating the 30K and 40K universes coming up. I still think that 30K will win out in a longer slog, whether it takes out the leadership or not. Leadership will make things a lot easier. However, I would be much more afraid of having Thrawn as an enemy than Palpatine, even though I think that there are definitely minds within the Imperium who could take on Thrawn. The bigger thing is, can the Imperium either reverse engineer the technology, and if it doesn't, is it smart enough to cut off the hyperspace lanes and solely allow certain abhumans to fill its ranks and do its fighting for it?
Interesting. All right. Next up, Geo.
I personally think that the Imperium, if they're able to get a swift and decisive decapitation of Imperial leadership, which would consist of the four main head honchos being Thrawn, Tarkin, Vader, and Palpatine, that would leave a massive power struggle in the Empire, and that would mean the Empire would essentially be not only at war with the Imperium but at war with itself over who would be the de facto leader. And I think if the Imperium is successful enough in four separate assassination missions, then they will have little to no issue mopping up a disorganized empire. However, if there is a bit of organization within the empire, let's say maybe one of those four survived the assassination attempt, I personally think the Imperium can still win because attrition is something that they are used to.
Yep.
And
even in 30K.
Yeah, even in 30K, they're still used to attrition. And I personally think the Imperium can win over, I would honestly give it maybe 100 to 20 years, like give or take, somewhere around those lines. But I do think the Imperium can pull off a decisive victory. It just needs, I would honestly say, it just needs the right kind of strategy to do it. And I think the best strategy would be decapitating the leadership and then simultaneously picking the collapsing empire apart.
All right, good to hear. All right, gents. My final thoughts, I guess. I already shared them. And yeah, stay tuned for part 2 of this, where we'll be talking about the Galactic Empire on the offense against the 41st Millennium Imperium. And any other fun stuff planned? If you want to partake in any future Orbital Drop podcast episodes, make sure to join my Discord server. It's where all this happens. It's how I met all these crazy gentlemen that I call friends for reasons beyond my comprehension.
Spell out the hyperlink. Spell it out with your mouth.
Okay.
Wait a second. I have a friend?
Yeah, no.
that can't be a thing.
Yeah, and make sure to check out the Twitch.
Just...
I might Twitch on it. I twitched a little bit of Fallout, and I might Twitch some Starfield and some other stuff when that comes out, if I have time. And also check out the Instagram. It's relatively raw, but I do upload some behind the scenes and a lot of my 3D printing going on there. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and thank you for enjoying this episode of the Orbital Drop podcast. See ya. Oh, I gotta say, I'm probably just gonna add my outro and post, but this has been Corporal Hot Pocket, showing you what the ladies like, one lesson at a time. And remember, Spartans, keep riding forward onto dawn.
Are you a virgin?
No, shut up. There's one. There's one more. Remember to hit that big red button.
Keep that in.
Shut up. Remember to hit that big red button to eradicate all the Xenos. Then hit the Liberty Bell to replace them with America. I got like 3 different intros, and they're all amazing.
They're the same thing.
With America.
To replace them with America. I was inspired by Major Kill. He would always say, like, hit the subscribe button, then hit the real subscribe button, referencing the bell. And I'm like, that's good, but I could do better.
Replace them with Scotland.
No.
Scotland forever!
What other countries associated with the bell? Only America's got the Liberty Bell.
Yeah, but as I said earlier to Port Car Bomb, the reason it's a Guinness glass is because the other one has the flower of Scotland on it.
Okay, whatever.
Oh, okay. This is acceptable.
And here's the thing. I didn't have the scotch to put in the stein with the flower of Scotland, so I figured even if it's a piss water beer, Guinness glasses have had Heineken in it before, even though this isn't Heineken. But, it's still piss wasser.
All right, I think I'm going to call it now.
Yeah, it's...
If you stayed with us until now, you truly have heard it all. The Imperium has the element of surprise as well as the raw force advantage through their bigger ships, towering titans, and endless walls of Sermite in their Space Marine legions. But the Empire has the size, speed, and technological advantages. Can they catch up and use their numbers and vast resources to push back the invaders? I'll leave that up to you. Stay tuned for part 2, where the Galactic Empire has to deal with the flustercluck of craziness in the 40K galaxy. And remember to hit that big red button to eradicate all the Xenos, then hit the Liberty Bell to replace them with America.
Just as the Founding Fathers intended.
This has been Corporal Hot Pockets and the boys of the Orbital Drop podcast, showing you what the ladies like, one lesson at a time. And remember to keep riding forward onto dawn, Spartans.